Not to mention this time, Captain Kurosaki is attending too. When it came to Captain Kurosaki, Aranmaru Shirshin sure was passionate. It seemed that he truly admired him. Kimura Muyang resurfaced from the pond and looked at Aranmaru Shirshin with a helpless face. You'll be joining the 11th Division anyway, right? You'll be able to see him all the time from now on, so what are you all excited about? At some point, Kimura Muyang was curious to find out what would happen if he trained using Shien's power underwater. To his surprise, it worked like wonder. Aside from the fact that his hair didn't turn spiky like usual, the effect from the training also improved, probably because the lightning was applied both internally and externally. However, this method also had its downsides. For example, there was no fish to be found in the pond where Kimura Muyang was in. That was because all of them already electrocuted to death during his first training there. After putting on his clothes and placed his zanpakuto on his sash, Kimura Muyang finally said, all right. It'd be fine as long as I go, right? He then made his way to the school. I've asked this before, Kimura, but I don't understand why you would spend every day training in the water. I already told you that it's more effective if I trained underwater. Tisk, Aranmaru Shirshin clicked his tongue because Kimura Muyang's explanation was as half-assed as always and then immediately asked, speaking of which, why didn't you train in Kido instead? Had you spent all those time underwater learning Kido, you might have become the best Kido user among us, students, even though your Kido right now isn't bad. That way, you would have gained the upper hand to join the division you want. It doesn't matter. I still got plenty of time, anyway. I can learn Kido anytime in the future, so I'd rather focus on training my Zenjutsu and Zanpakuto for now. Kimura Muyang replied. It would take a while before the plot started anyway. He still got more than 200 years, so he wasn't particularly worried about Kido or even picking division. Didn't I tell you? Kimura Muyang said as he turned to Aranmaru Shirshin. What? Captain Hikifune offered me to become the 12th Division Lieutenant. What? Aranmaru Shirshin said incredulously, Lieutenant? Being offered to become a lieutenant as soon as you graduated. Since when did you? Probably half a year ago. Aranmaru Shirshin just smiled wryly as he froze in the spot while Kimura Muyang kept walking. Hurry up. Otherwise, you might not be able to see Captain Kurosaki. Ah. Hearing Kimura Muyang's words, Aranmaru Shirshin quickly caught up. However, the surprised look was still clear on his face. Kimura, you really are something else, even the captains may be overshadowed today by your fame. You're definitely exaggerating right now. I'm not. Serving as a lieutenant right after graduation was unheard of, after all. Ha 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 ha, Kimura Muyang laughed awkwardly. This time he was the one who froze after hearing Aranmaru Shirshin's words. He didn't want to be the center of attention for sure, especially on a day where a lot of people would come like today. Wow, there are so many people. Is there no classes today? Kimura, don't tell me you forgot. On graduation day, everyone would assemble in this square, expecting the captain's arrival. Well, this is my first year, so I don't know about the past years. You really are. Aranmaru Shirshin was at a loss for words as he looked at Kimura Muyang helplessly. Forget it, you didn't come to class most of the time, anyway. Look, the second one on the left is Captain Kurosaki. I really want to serve and fight side to side with him. Aranmaru Shirshin looked at the tall man standing proudly along with other captains with admiring eyes. Kurosaki Kenpachi. Kimura Muyang looked at the tall man with dark, messy hair, and beast-like sharp eyes, giving off an intimidating aura even from a mile away. Realizing that he was being looked at, Kurosaki Kenpachi immediately looked at Kimura Muyang keenly. Realizing Kimura Muyang didn't flinch even when their eyes met, he asked Kairaku Shunsui, Kairaku, do you know who that guy is? As Kairaku Shunsui retraced Kurosaki Kenpachi's gaze, he smiled and said, Ah, that's Kimura Muyang. Are you interested in him? Oh ho. So he's the rumored prodigy. Kurosaki Kenpachi said as he rubbed his chin. I thought the students are just exaggerating the rumors, but now that I see him with my own eyes, he does seem like a capable guy. Oh, did you fancy with him? Forget it, Hikifune called dibs on him. Hikifune, huh? Kurosaki Kenpachi looked doubtfully towards Hikifune Kiryu. Hikifune Kiryu smiled apologetically. Sorry, Captain Kurosaki, he has promised to join our division. I finally come across such a promising rookie, too bad. Kurosaki Kenpachi shook his head and sighed as he looked at Kimura Muyang. However, the kid beside him doesn't seem too bad either. Kurosaki Kenpachi said as he saw Aranmura Shirshin, who stood beside Kimura Muyang. Yes, you have good eyes, and that passionate gaze of his toward you is something else. He might have idolized you, Yukitake chuckled after a quick glance at Aranmura Shirshin. Yeah, it seems that you'll be getting a promising rookie too. Kairaku Shunsui said in harmony. Indeed. Despite his handsome face, he seemed to be itching for a fight. I can see the fighting spirit buried deep in his heart. He was definitely born to be a member of the 11th Division. The more Kurosaki Kenpachi looked at Aranmura Shirshin, the more pleased he was because of how natural Aranmura Shirshin seemed. By the way, Hikifune, which seat you'll assign for Kimura Muyang? He should be able to get quite a decent seat with his skill, you know. Kairaku Shunsui asked towards Hikifune Kiryu as he held down his hat. Lisa didn't tell you? Hikifune Kiryu glanced at Kairaku Shunsui curiously. I had met him personally beforehand and offered him the lieutenant's seat. Lisa was also there, so I thought she already told you. Ah, Lisa-chan is so cold, hiding such a thing from her captain. Lieutenant. Hikifune, isn't that a little too rash? I mean, I did hear that he is exceptionally skilled, but being a lieutenant right after graduation? It hasn't happened in years. Yukitake was surprised. Yeah, Yukitake is right, Kairaku Shunsui and Kurosaki Kenpachi shared the same opinion. It's okay. The 12th Division itself isn't that hectic. Besides, with me watching over him, I believe his talent will blossom. Moreover, have you ever seen someone who was even more skilled than a lieutenant and almost as skilled as a captain even before enrolling in the academy? Kimura was no ordinary student, to begin with. Hearing Hikifune Kiryu's explanation, Kairaku Shunsui just slightly tilted his hat down, covering his face. Well, Hikifune, you may have a point. Kimura should not be evaluated by an average student standard in the first place. If you go as far as saying that, we will just have to believe your judgment. Kairaku. Yukitake looked at Kairaku Shunsui helplessly and then said to Hikifune Kiryu, well, a captain has the right to appoint a lieutenant of their own division, so it's not our place to butt in. However, I just want to remind you that he's a rookie. Make sure you won't regret it in case things go south later. Well, of course, I know. Hikifune Kiryu slightly nodded. As a senior captain, she obviously knew what she got onto. Just how long Vice Headmaster planned to keep up his speech. Good grief, no matter where you go, the leaders are always full of bullshit. Kimura was getting fed of the Vice Headmaster's formality speech. In a way, the Vice Headmaster is so amazing for being able to talk that long while keeping the captains waiting. Okay, the next step is the time for admission to each division. Students may apply to the division they wish to join. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief because the pointlessly long speech has finally come to an end. Every graduate immediately ran to each table that represented each division, hoping to be enlisted in their desired division. Kimura, since you are all set, I will go straight to the 11th Division on my own. A bunch of people is already running over there. After a quick glance, Kimura Muyang saw that many students were running to the 11th Division. It seemed that Kurosaki Kenpachi truly was a charismatic figure in the Soul Society. It's obviously a combat-specialized division, but so many students wished to join that division. It just went to show how many people looked up to him. Oh ho! I saw you keep staring at the 11th division. Did you also admire Captain Kurosaki? A sexy voice rang in Kimura Muyang's ear. Kimura Muyang looked back and found Hikifune Kiryu was standing there. Of course not, Kiryu-san. I've decided to devote myself to you. Hikifune Kiryu just laughed it off, but she didn't bother to respond to Kimura Muyang's compliment as she led the way to the 12th Division's headquarters. From now on, you are the lieutenant of the 12th Division. You must realize your responsibility as one and be sure not to let me down. I will try my best. Kimura Muyang clenched his fist and steeled his resolve. After all, he has been entrusted with such an important position. How could he let Hikifune Kiryu down? Kimura Muyang, you are now officially appointed as the 12th Division Lieutenant. Hikifune Kiryu said on their way to Kimura Muyang, who followed closely behind her. Yes, I will live up to Captain's expectation. Kimura Muyang solemnly said as he took the lieutenant badge from Hikifune Kiryu. The only thing in his mind was to make sure that he didn't let her down. Hikifune Kiryu officially appointed Kimura Muyang as the 12th Division's lieutenant right in the middle of the crowds. Obviously, the crowd would go crazy when they heard this because Kimura Muyang himself was famous enough among the students and Gotei 13 members, while Hikifune Kiryu could easily draw everyone's attention with his presence, be it as a captain or a charming woman. When the two of them walked together, obviously, all eyes would be focused on them. Yet, Hikifune Kiryu casually handed the lieutenant badge to Kimura Muyang right in front of the crowds. Lieutenant. Did I hear that right? He was appointed as a lieutenant right after graduation. Is Kimura Muyang so strong that he was appointed as lieutenant right off the bat? I mean, I kind of saw it from a mile away that he'd get a decent seat in any division and eventually become a lieutenant after a few years, but becoming a lieutenant right away is just. Noticing that the whole venue was surprised because of Kimura Muyang, Oranmura Shirshin just smiled helplessly. As he predicted, the captains were overshadowed by him today. Sheesh, of course, people would react like this. Kairaku Shunsui sighed while holding down his hat. Hikifune completely stole everyone's attention. Yukitake felt helpless when he saw what happened. Interesting little brat. Kurosaki Kenpachi said when he looked at Oranmura Shirshin right after a quick glance at Kimura Muyang. He smiled when he saw Oranmura Shirshin was taking the test on his division as Oranmura Shirshin seemed to be quite an interesting fellow too. Captain. Why would you appoint a newly graduated student as a lieutenant? The 12th Division member, who was in charge of accepting applications from the graduates, immediately stood up out of surprise and asked his Hikifune Kiryu right away upon hearing that Kimura Muyang was appointed as the 12th Division's lieutenant. It's not that I doubt your judgment, Captain, but he just graduated today. Another man said as he looked at Kimura Muyang with disdain. It's third seat Otaku. He's usually a quiet guy. Why did he go against Captain's decision all of a sudden? What happened to him? Well, it can't be helped. He has served as the third seat for quite a while, and a newly graduated student comes out of nowhere and becomes his superior. I would have reacted the same way if it happened to me. The Shinigamis from other divisions couldn't help but gossip about the ruckus. After all, Otaku Byakuya has served as the third seat for quite a while, and everybody liked him due to his collected demeanor, but he just snapped all of a sudden. Kimura Muyang turned around to see who was so against him being appointed as a lieutenant. He had an average build, shoulder-length black hair, and a gentle-looking face. The man's face also flushed, probably because he was too worked up. However, he didn't seem that angry for someone who was against his captain's decision for some reason. Even though Kimura Muyang realized something was off, he didn't know what was it with this man, so he racked his brain to find the solution for this problem. Do you have a problem with my judgment, Otaku? Hikifune Kiryu said with a stern tone. Otaku Byakuya seemed panicked. Hikifune Kiryu herself was also shocked when Otaku Byakuya suddenly protested. After all, he has been serving under her for a long time, so she knew him thoroughly, and she found it weird that he would question her judgment in front of everyone. However, after seeing him up close, she had a rough idea of the cause behind it. "It's Lil Hiyori, isn't it?" Seeing Sutaku Byakuya's flushed face, Hikifune Kiryu shook her head helplessly. Apparently, Hiyori put him up to this. Otherwise, a man like Sutaku Byakuya would never say such a thing. While the rest didn't know anything, Hikifune Kiryu nodded and gave Sutaku Byakuya a look that indicated she understood his reason. She then turned to Kimura Muyang and noticed that he seemed to be thinking about resolving this problem in his own way, so she decided to use this opportunity to see Kimura Muyang's strength for herself. Kairaku did say that Kimura Muyang was even more skilled than an average lieutenant without showing his true strength, but she was curious to see him going all out with her own eyes. "How about it, Kimura?" Hikifune Kiryu said, startling those who were curious about how she would deal with this matter. Hikifune Kiryu's question snapped Kimura Muyang back to his senses. He couldn't come up with a better idea other than defeating the man called Sutaku. "Since Sutaku said that you just graduated and your skill is incredible, take this chance to show everyone why you deserve this position. I think no one will be able to complain once they witness your true strength." Hearing Hikifune Kiryu's words, everyone nodded one after another. After all, one's skill and strength determined their worth as a Shinigami. Even Hikifune Kiryu shared the same opinion as he did. It seemed like there was no other solution other than defeating Sutaku Byakuya. He realized that one's strength spoke volumes. Even Kenpachi, who didn't seem that bright and didn't even graduate from the academy, could become a captain, so why couldn't he? As he placed his hand on the hilt and took his stance, Kimura Muyang planned to show the man in front of him that he deserved to be a lieutenant. After all, he'd be his subordinate from now on, so he had to make sure that there won't be any problem in the future. "Kimura, keep it in moderation. Sutaku did this because Hiyori put him up to this." Hikifune Kiryu whispered in Kimura Muyang's ear. It all made sense to Kimura Muyang now. The man in front of him behaved strangely because Hiyori pitted him against Kimura Muyang, and Hiyori never made any move up until now because she rather wouldn't dirty her own hands. Kimura Muyang glanced sympathetically at Sutaku Byakuya because he was kind of in the same position as him because of Hiyori. Seeing Kimura Muyang seem to understand his current circumstances, Sutaku Byakuya seemed relieved because it wasn't like he wanted to ruin his relationship with his lieutenant in the future. When everyone saw Kimura Muyang's hand was already on his Zanpakuto's hilt, they thought he and Sutaku Byakuya were about to duke it out, so they immediately backed off, leaving the stage to those two. However, when Kimura Muyang and Sutaku Byakuya looked into each other's eyes, they understood what happened and let go of their Zanpakuto. "What the hell? Aren't you going to fight? We even cleared off the place for you guys." "Yeah, that's right. Are you going to fight or not?" "Well, it can't be helped. Even though he's a prodigy or whatever, he would be no match against a seated officer." "Now that you said it, that makes sense. Wait, what's with this amount of Ryatsu?" Kimura Muyang let go of his hand and stopped restraining his Ryatsu instead to overwhelm everyone. That way, he didn't have to fight. An intense Ryatsu burst forth, overwhelming everyone in the vicinity except for a handful of high-ranking seated officers. "Oh ho! This is pretty impressive. Most people can't even move a muscle. This Ryatsu rivals that of a captain. It seems that I underestimated him yet again." Kairaku Shunsui was impressed by Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu, while the rest just gasped and they realized they couldn't move. "This is really something else. It seems we can't just treat him as a rookie. He may be appointed as a captain in a few years at this rate." Kurosaki Kenpachi shrugged his shoulder as he looked at Kimura Muyang. "I'm pretty far, yet I can't even move. What about Sutaku Byakuya, who bears the brunt of this terrifying Ryatsu?" A Shinigami who thought that Kimura Muyang was no match to a seated officer earlier said. Kimura Muyang immediately suppressed his Ryatsu after a quick demonstration of his strength. If he kept it up any longer, some students might be in danger, after all. It finally stopped. Yukitake wiped his forehead. He really is not to be underestimated. His strength is the real deal. Once the Shinigami earlier could move, he immediately turned his gaze at Satoku Byakuya. He and the rest of the Shinigamis were shocked beyond belief when he found Satoku Byakuya was still standing as if Kimura Muyang's intense Ryatsu didn't affect him at all. Did he left Satoku out of it on purpose? Excellent control. Hikifune Kiryu looked at Kimura Muyang and secretly praised him. At first glance, his Ryatsu just seems intense and out of control. It turns out he can delicately control his Ryatsu. And the most important thing is because Satoku was still standing, he won't be humiliated among these crowds. Even though Satoku is a gentleman, there would be a rift between them if he was overwhelmed by Kimura's Ryatsu. Satoku Byakuya obviously realized what Kimura Muyang did just now. He also knew that Kimura Muyang deliberately spared him for his own sake. Judging from the state everyone was in, Satoku Byakuya had no doubt that he wouldn't be able to withstand the Ryatsu at that level if Kimura Muyang let his Ryatsu burst forth without controlling it. He would be humiliated for sure if that was the case. With that in mind, Satoku Byakuya felt a little grateful to Kimura Muyang. He was a gentleman to begin with. He did this just because Hiyori put him up to this. Now that Kimura Muyang has demonstrated his strength and even went as far as showing mercy to him, he had no complaint whatsoever. "I'm sorry for being rude earlier, and nice to meet you, Lieutenant." Satoku Byakuya bowed respectfully. Seeing what Satoku Byakuya did, the other 12th Division's member quickly followed suit and said, "Nice to meet you, Lieutenant." Kimura Muyang was slightly embarrassed seeing this many people welcomed and showed their respect to him all of a sudden. "It's alright, really. The same goes for you guys. Nice to meet you, too." He sure resolves this elegantly. Not only did he demonstrate his strength in front of everyone, he also made sure not to create any rift between him and his division member. It seems like the vacancy in the captain's seat will be taken care of soon. Kairaku Shunsui said as he looked at Kimura Muyang. Yes, Genryusai-sensei can at least rest easy now. Yukitake Jushiro was already right beside Kairaku Shunsui, watching Kimura Muyang before Kairaku Shunsui realized it. Indeed, Godei 13 is really short on capable Shinigami recently. That captain's seat has been going through more change lately. Old Yamamoto must have had a rough time dealing with this problem. Kairaku Shunsui said as he turned his head towards Yukitake Jushiro. "You haven't been looking well lately. Old Yamamoto is worried, you know." "Sensei is?" Yukitake Jushiro said apologetically. "Don't worry. It's not your fault. Just take care of your health, you hear me?" "All right," Yukitake Jushiro said. He then shifted his gaze towards the graduating students in the square. "I can't help but feel that Soul Society will be fine when I see those energetic students." Both Yukitake Jushiro and Kairaku Shunsui had a fleeting look in their eyes as they looked at the students in the square. They've lived for quite a while, so they couldn't help but appreciate this kind of moment. Right when Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu burst out. First Division, Captain's Office. Captain Commander Yamamoto, whose eyes were partially closed slit most of the time, suddenly opened wide. "This Ryatsu. This is undoubtedly a captain level's Ryatsu. Does it belong to that brat Kimura Muyang?" Captain Commander Yamamoto stroked the cane in his hand. "He has come this far, huh?" Schwa. A figure emerged right behind Captain Commander Yamamoto. "Captain Commander. Did you feel it too, Chojiro?" "Yes, it's undoubtedly Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu. To think that his Ryatsu has already reached this level. I'm sure that brat will continue to surprise us. Kimura Kanzuya sure found one hell of a disciple. Captain Commander, he really is. No need to say any further. Let bygones be bygones. So many years have passed since then, and there aren't that many who knew about it anyway. Thank you, Captain Commander. Chojiro, I heard that Hikifune recruited him as the 12th Division Lieutenant. As a fellow lieutenant, be sure to look out for him so that he does not end up like Kimura Kanzuya. Understood, Captain Commander, I will be sure to keep an eye on him. At the same time, the captains from other divisions also felt Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu and immediately laid their gaze towards Shino Academy while wondering whose Ryatsu it was. The news about Kimura Muyang officially took over the lieutenant's seat, with the rest of the division members acknowledging him, immediately spread throughout Siriidii. To think that rumored genius is this strong, the current Shihoin clan's head, Shihoin Masaaki, was relaxing in his courtyard when he heard the news about Kimura Muyang, who became a lieutenant right after graduating. Kimura Muyang definitely piqued his interest because not even a member of the Shihoin clan was capable of such a feat. As the next head of Shihoin clan, you can't let yourself fall behind. Shihoin Masaaki said toward the girl next to him. The girl seemed to be around 15 or 16 years old. Her dark skin gave a wild vibe to her in addition to her beauty. I know. Still, though, it's just a lieutenant. No need to make a big deal out of it. I do admit that he's good, though, waving his hand casually, Yoruchi didn't seem to care about it at all. Hearing his daughter's response, Shihoin Masaaki couldn't help but smile wryly. His daughter was talented, but her personality is the problem. He couldn't even imagine leaving the Shihoin clan to her right now. Kuchiki clan official residence. Sojin, did you feel that Ryatsu? Yes, Oto-sama. It's sure intense, but not as good as yours. Be sure to work hard, so you don't embarrass the Kuchiki clan. Understood, Oto-sama. Kuchiki Jinrei knew that his son neither liked fighting nor was he good at it, but since he was the next Kuchiki clan's head, he was destined to bring glory to Kuchiki clan since birth. Meanwhile, on the square, the graduates and those who were overwhelmed by Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu slowly got back on their feet, but their eyes were spinning. It couldn't be helped since it was not every day one could come into contact with that level of Ryatsu up close, even for Gotei 13 members. Watanabe Ichiro was kneeling on the ground with eyes full of disbelief. He was completely overwhelmed by Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu, unable to move even though he mustered all his strength. Because of that, he couldn't shake off the inferiority he felt toward Kimura Muyang. How can I be bested by a random guy from Rukongai? I am a noble. There's no way in hell I'd fall short to the likes of him. I'm the real genius, not him. Watanabe Ichiro shed the tears of humiliation. Even though his household wasn't as well known as the four noble houses, it was one of the noble family nonetheless, and he has displayed extraordinary talent since birth, so everyone around him had high hopes for him. However, ever since Kimura Muyang came, no one fawned over him anymore. Even though Kimura Muyang rarely attended classes after 3 months of his enrollment, he still became the center of attention. Even though both of them didn't know each other, Watanabe Ichiro has always considered Kimura Muyang as his rival, but what happened just now completely crushed his pride. Kimura Muyang became a lieutenant with Ryatsu that rivaled a captain's. Moreover, he was so good at Zenjutsu that he managed to defeat a former lieutenant with Zenjutsu alone. Even though his other Zenkinsoki wasn't as good as his Zenjutsu, it was still much better than most students. I'm such a trash compared to him. Don't let it get to you, Ichiro. You are not inferior to anyone. You just have to believe in yourself. A big and gentle hand patted Watanabe Ichiro's shoulder. Uncle. Watanabe Ichiro exclaimed when he saw a muscular figure around Kurosaki Kenpachi's height with short hair and the intimidating atmosphere around him. The most striking thing out of it was the white haori he wore. Yo, if it isn't this the 5th Division Captain, Watanabe Kiryu. Kairaku Shunsui greeted the figure who just came with a smile even though there was no trace of joy at all from his tone. Ah, Captain Kairaku, you didn't bring your lieutenant along today? If I recall correctly, her name was Lisa Yadamaru, right? I remember she was such a cute girl. Hearing what Watanabe Kiryu said, Kurosaki Kenpachi frowned. Even the kind-hearted Yukitake Jushiro did so too. It seemed that they didn't particularly get along with him. Kairaku Shunsui then replied, still with a smile on his face, "Well, it's important to let my subordinate rest from time to time." Humph. Watanabe Kiryu grunted when he heard Kairaku Shuansui's answer and immediately turned towards Kimura Muyang, asked in an unfriendly tone, "Are you Kimura Muyang?" Although the captain who just came didn't seem so friendly to him, he had no reason to offend a captain for such a trivial matter, so he nodded and asked politely, "Yes, is there anything I can help you, Captain Watanabe?" "No, but I do have a little advice for you." There was a brief pause before Watanabe Kiryu looked at Kimura Muyang with disdain. "If that's all you got, then you better not get ahead of yourself. Although your Ryatsu is decent, a captain's strength is beyond your wildest imagination. If you think you've reached a captain's level with that strength of yours, then you're completely mistaken." Seeing this nobody that didn't even show up in the anime blabbing whatever he wanted, a fire was lit in Kimura Muyang's heart. "You," Kimura Muyang glared at Watanabe Kiryu. He tried his best to contain his anger, but it seemed that he was at his limit. Watanabe Kiryu leered at Kimura Muyang and mockingly said, "Are you planning to challenge a captain? First of all, it's a crime, and secondly, do you think you stand a chance against me?" The other three captains didn't seem too pleased seeing a captain humiliated a lieutenant in public for no reason. They were so embarrassed by this behavior. "You," Kimura Muyang snapped and immediately held his Zanpakuto. No one has ever humiliated him to this extent. Seeing what Kimura Muyang did, everyone couldn't help but gasp as they thought, would he actually fight a captain? Everything happened too fast that no one could process what was happening anymore. Kairaku Shunsui held down his straw hat, hiding his expression below his hat while murmuring, "Ouch," the young man completely snapped for sure. His tone, however, was vague whether he was troubled or enjoying this situation. Captain Watanabe is really, even the kind-hearted Yukitake Jushiro was exasperated by Watanabe Kiryu's behavior. Kurosaki Kenpachi was staring at Watanabe Kiryu disdainfully at first, but then he slightly smiled as he saw Kimura Muyang's guts. Nobody even blinked when Kimura Muyang was about to draw his Zanpakuto. Everyone just gasped as they were convinced that things were about to get out of hand. The situation escalated so quickly. Watanabe Kiryu remained unmoved while giving Kimura Muyang a cold look. Suddenly, a different kind of Ryatsu seeped out of Kimura Muyang. As it intensified, a chilling sound was heard from his Zanpakuto even though he hasn't drawn it yet, but that alone already sent a chill down everyone's spine. "Is this?" Kairaku Shunsui suddenly raised his face excitedly, "This level of kendo is unbelievable." The look on Yukitake Jushiro's face also drastically changed as he and Kairaku Shunsui looked at each other. They had a hard time hiding their excitement as it was clear in their eyes. Kurosaki Kenpachi seemed a little surprised when Kimura Muyang let out the current Ryatsu, and his eyes flashed as he looked towards Kimura Muyang as if he just found something interesting. Hearing the odd sound alerted Watanabe Kiryu for a moment as his complexion slightly changed. Although he didn't know what sound it was, he was on guard for a moment. However, the disdainful look on his face was back as soon as he realized that there was no way a mere lieutenant posed a threat to himself, a captain. As Kimura Muyang was about to draw his Zanpakuto, a soft and fair-skinned hand completely stopped him. Even though the hand seemed feeble at first glance, he couldn't move at all. From the looks of it, this might be a Bakuto at work, but Kimura Muyang wasn't sure because he hasn't learned Kido. However, the most surprising thing was it was Hikifune Kiryu, who stopped Kimura Muyang and effortlessly too at that, as expected of the woman who would later be recruited to Zero Division. "That is enough, Captain Watanabe. Since when did you get the right to lecture my lieutenant?" Hikifune Kiryu was already right beside Kimura Muyang before anyone realized it and stopped him from drawing his Zanpakuto. She then took a step forward and warned Watanabe Kiryu. Her tone was neither high nor low, but it sure was impactful that even Watanabe Kiryu subconsciously took a step back. The other three captains were shocked by what they just saw. They didn't realize how Hikifune Kiryu had become. Be it her exquisite shunpa, the way she stopped Kimura Muyang's hand with Bakudo, or her intimidating aura that left Watanabe Kiryu speechless, all of them made people wonder just how strong she actually was. Realizing he just took a step back due to the sheer pressure from Hikifune Kiryu, Watanabe Kiryu was mad at himself. Even though most people didn't notice it, he couldn't bear the thought of cracking under the pressure of a fellow captain. Watanabe Kiryu grunted but tried his best to keep his poker face. He then immediately turned around, fluttering his Haori, and used Shunpa to return to the 5th division. Seeing Watanabe Kiryu disappeared from her sight without saying a word, Hikifune Kiryu turned around and smiled. At the same time, the force that restricted Kimura Muyang's movement suddenly disappeared. Kimura Muyang was grateful to Hikifune Kiryu. Hadn't it for intervention, the fight between him and Watanabe Kiryu would have been inevitable. Despite saying that he was confident in his own strength and his opponent was just a minor character who didn't appear in the anime, he was a captain nonetheless. Setting Zaraki Kenpachi aside, all captain could use Bankai, while he hasn't even mastered Shirkai. Thank you, Captain. Kimura Muyang said sincerely. Don't mention it. That's what I'm supposed to do as a captain, after all. Slightly smiled, Hikifune Kiryu continued, why did you stop calling me Kiryu-san like you used to? I'd prefer that over captain, actually. Hikifune said teasingly. Kimura Muyang blushed and laughed it off, ahahaha, I see what you did there, Kiryu-san. Everyone around them was dumbfounded. To think that Kimura Muyang could still show such an embarrassed and innocent face after challenging a captain. Ahem ahem. Hikifune Kiryu was slightly startled by Kimura Muyang's response, so he cleared his throat and tried changing the subject. There's nothing left to see here, guys. Get back to your post. We still have a lot of things to do. Only then did everyone snap back to their senses and resumed their delayed activity, and the admission procedure for the new recruit returned to its track. It was clear that what just happened would leave an impression among them. The name Kimura Muyang would probably become even more well-known throughout Seoul society from now on. However, it wouldn't be as Shino Academy's genius anymore, but as the 12th Division's lieutenant. You are now the lieutenant of the 12th Division. I will brief you about specific things once we're in the headquarters. For now, follow me. I will introduce you to some people. Kiryu-san. HM. What is it? The 5th Division captain just now, why did he? Ah, it can't be helped if you don't know. After a brief pause, Hikifune Kiryu continued, before you came to, there was a well-known prodigy in Shino Academy before you came here, and his name is Watanabe Ichiro. He excelled at everything, Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Kido, or Shunpa, just name it. Everyone says that he is a genius who will be born once every 10 years, but after you come. Hikifune Kiryu then looked at Kimura Muyang at the end of her explanation, and Kimura Muyang nodded in understanding. I've heard that name, but I don't know him. I mean, even if he is Captain Watanabe's nephew, I don't understand why Captain Watanabe treat me like that. Kimura Muyang seemed puzzled. Is there the need to go that far just because of such a trivial thing? If that was the case, he couldn't help but think that Captain Watanabe was such a petty guy. Not only that, Watanabe clan was once a high-ranking noble house, but it has been in decline, and lately, they were almost unheard of. That was still the case even after Watanabe Kiryu became the 5th Division's captain recently. Moreover, Watanabe clan only had 2 of them left as successor, meaning Watanabe Ichiro is the last pillar of Watanabe clan. It makes sense, but why would he go that far just because of this? Kimura Muyang just couldn't accept that excuse. Kiryu-san, how strong is Captain Watanabe? Hikifune Kiryu had this surprised look on his face and said, I don't recommend fighting him. He is captain, after all. If you insist on doing so, you must learn Bankai first. After all, there is a huge difference between being able to use it and not being able to use it. Hee hee. Kimura Muyang scratched his head shyly. Hikifune Kiryu herself wasn't exactly against the idea of him fighting Watanabe Kiryu. She was just worried that he would lose, that's all. Apparently, Watanabe Kiryu was famous for being a good-for-nothing captain. Forget it. You will understand eventually. Now, I'll take you to see the three captains first. Well, don't trouble yourself, Hikifune. We're already here. Kairaku Shunsui, Yukitake Jushiro, and Kuryoshiki Kenpachi were already in front of them. Kairaku Shunsui then looked at Kimura Muyang and said with a smile, "Good grief, we meet again, Kimura. You've become so strong that I barely recognize you since the last time we met." "You're exaggerating, Captain Kairaku." "Ah, are you using honorifics now? Last time we met, you just called me Shunsui." Kimura Muyang's face flushed, and he didn't know what to say because Kairaku Shunsui was not entirely wrong. "Well, that should be enough teasing you. Let me introduce you first. This is Captain Yukitake, 13th Division Captain, and here is Captain Kuryoshiki, 11th Division Captain. Pleased to meet you, Captain Yukitake and Captain Kuryoshiki. I have heard the rumors about you, Kimura." Yukitake Jushiro said while waving his hand. "Lieutenant Kimura, please come to the 11th Division if you have spare time. I'm sure you'll like the atmosphere there." "Huh?" Kimura Muyang was stunned when he heard Kuryoshiki Kenpachi invited him out of nowhere. "Welcome back, Captain." "Yeah. Good day, Captain." "Yeah." As Hikifune Kiryu entered the 12th Division's barrack, everyone who saw her coming welcomed her politely. It was clear that they deeply respected their captain. Meanwhile, Kimura Muyang was ignored even though some of them glanced at him while wondering who he was. However, what baffled them was the fact that the third seat, Sutaku Byakuya, was walking behind Kimura Muyang. As they were right in front of the captain's office, Hikifune Kiryu gave a certain instruction to Sutaku Byakuya: "Order all members to gather in the lounge within half an hour, I have an announcement to make." One of Sutaku Byakuya's eyebrows raised. He realized that his captain planned to introduce the new lieutenant to everyone and immediately left to do as he was instructed. "Now, you're up next, Kimura." Hikifune Kiryu turned his head to Kimura Muyang and smiled. "Me?" Kimura Muyang puzzled. "Well, let's talk about it inside. I'd rather talk about it while sitting on a sofa, after all." Hikifune Kiryu pushed open the door to Captain's office and led the way. Kimura Muyang followed Hikifune Kiryu while wondering what she would tell him. At the same time, in the 12th Division's lounge. "Huh? You're back, Byakuya. That means the captain should be at her office now, right? I'll head over there real quick." Seeing Sutaku Byakuya appearing in the lounge, Hiyori immediately jumped up. "Wait, Hiyori." As Hiyori was about to run past Sutaku Byakuya, she was stopped in her tracks by Sutaku Byakuya. "That's Captain and Lieutenant have something to discuss in Captain's office." "What? Lieutenant?" Everyone was shocked and they heard Sutaku Byakuya. Since the 12th Division's lieutenant seat has been vacant for quite a while, they've always thought that Sutaku Byakuya was their substitute lieutenant, and even if a new lieutenant was appointed, it should be the third seat Sutaku. However, that third seat Sutaku was obviously right in front of them, so who was the lieutenant he mentioned? Everyone began to wonder whether Sutaku Byakuya hit his head somewhere. "Third seat Sutaku, what do you mean by lieutenant?" "Yes, even if we have a new lieutenant, it should be you." "Ahaha. Haha." Sutaku Byakuya scratched his head and smiled awkwardly. "No, it's the lieutenant that captain appointed today." "What? Stop joking, third seat Sutaku. Didn't you go to Shino Academy with Captain today to recruit new members? Then how did that lead to us having a new lieutenant?" Tanaka Tatsue laughed and said teasingly, "It's as if you're saying that Captain appointed a student who just graduated today as our lieutenant." The rest of them laughed as well. Becoming a seated officer right after graduation alone was already a rare case, but a lieutenant? That was unheard of. Well, it's exactly as you said. Captain appointed picked Kimura who just graduated as lieutenant. Sutaku Byakuya casually said despite everyone laughing. The laughter immediately stopped, replaced by a look of disbelief. The silence was broken by Hayori, who cursed and pointed her hands at Sutaku Byakuya out of nowhere. "Baldy Byakuya, I've told you to stop, Captain, right? Why would you let someone like that become our lieutenant? We don't even know if he's capable enough to be one." "Hayori, give Sutaku-san a break. He mustered his courage to go against Captain's decision in front of everyone today, but Lieutenant, he—" "Hayori, why did you hit me out of nowhere? Did you say Lieutenant? Idiot Yoshihara, you actually acknowledged that kind of guy as our lieutenant." Hayori fiercely smacked one of the 12th Division's members, who referred Kimura Muyang as lieutenant. "You're such a pushover. That's why you're still a 6th seat. Pushover. No way. But he does deserve to be a lieutenant, Hayori. Why did you hit me again? I'm gonna kick your ass if you call him lieutenant one more time." "Wait, Hayori. Just ask the others if you don't believe me." Yoshiwara Fukasawa hurriedly shielded his head with his hands when he saw Hayori was throwing a tantrum again. Hearing what Yoshiwara Fukasawa said, Hayori immediately shifted his gaze toward the other division members who went along with Hikifune Kiryu to the academy today, and they all nodded immediately. Seeing their response, Hayori was getting confused. She began to wonder whether Kimura Muyang really deserved the lieutenant's seat when she saw the look on everyone's faces, especially Sutaku Byakuya, who was supposed to be the most plausible candidate for the next lieutenant. What exactly happened today? Sutaku, Hayori, can you explain in detail? We can't understand what you're talking about. Tanaka Tatsue finally asked the most important thing here on behalf of the rest. Yeah, 4th seat Tanaka is right. We don't even know what the hell you guys are saying. We demand an explanation. Sutaku Byakuya was helpless. If he didn't explain what happened properly, the division members would definitely nag him later. However, he couldn't just casually explain it because Captain hasn't introduced Kimura Muyang to everyone else. As he racked his brain, he saw Yoshiwara Fukasawa, and his eyes lit up. "Since you guys have gone said that much, 6th seat Yoshihara here will have to explain everything to you guys. The rest of you who came to the academy today will join me and notify other members to gather here within half an hour, Captain's order." The rest of the division members in the lounge immediately flocked around Yoshiwara Fukasawa, awaiting his explanation about the newly appointed mysterious lieutenant. Hayori was no exception, but unlike others, she was a bit rough as she went ahead and pulled Yoshihara's ear. As Kimura Muyang put down the teacup he was holding, he couldn't help but be amazed by Hikifune Kiryu's beauty. However, he immediately cast that thought away as they were in the middle of a discussion. In short, we, the 12th Division, rarely needs to sortie to the battlefield. We're mostly responsible for monitoring Soul Society, Human World, Hueco Mundo, and Dangai to ensure the balance and stability of these worlds. Close. The 3 worlds are relatively stable overall. Everything should be okay unless something major happened, and even if something does go wrong, it's not necessarily our job to take care of the problem. Hollow did often appear in Dangai, and we may have to deal with that, but not all the time. Well, there are more little details, but you should be fine as you learn it along the way. You'll eventually get used to it, and there's no point going into details now. Hikifune Kiryu then stood up and said, "Okay, let's go to the lounge. I want to introduce you to everyone. We all will be comrades that work and live together, after all." Yes. Kimura Muyang nodded and followed closely behind Hikifune Kiryu. He was the 12th Division lieutenant from now on, and this place would be his home for a while. The new lieutenant must be handsome. You haven't even seen him. What are you saying? But I do think the lieutenant must be as handsome as me. TSK, quit spouting nonsense. As if the likes of you guys can predict what kind of man the lieutenant is. One of the members said arrogantly, and as his complexion suddenly changed, he said, he didn't falter even when he faced the 5th Division captain. He must have the nerve of steel like me. TSK. This time, the rest of them was put off by that guy's narcissism. Hiyori herself was still wondering whether Kimura Muyang was truly that strong. He could see him being as strong as love, but saying he was at the level of a lieutenant might be too far-fetched. Even if he was, calling him lieutenant from now on just didn't sit well with her. Schwa. As the lounge door was opened, the atmosphere became dead silent. Everyone immediately turned their heads to 2 figures standing at the door, but their focus was completely on the man who would become their lieutenant, not their beloved captain. As the door was pushed open, Kimura Muyang noticed that every eye in the room was on him, which took him aback. All 12th Division members carefully observed Kimura Muyang with an admiring look on their faces. This was completely unexpected for him as he was fully prepared for the worst, as it made sense if the rest of the members couldn't accept him as the new lieutenant. However, what he saw before him completely blew his mind. Hikifune smiled slightly. As she expected, half an hour was enough for everyone to know what happened that day. Strength was basically everything here, after all. Thus, once everyone realized how strong Kimura Muyang was, their impression of Kimura Muyang would definitely change, which would be helpful for their relationship as fellow division members from now on. Okay, come with me. Kimura Muyang then closed the door and followed closely behind Hikifune Kiryu, who then said, "Let me introduce you guys to our new lieutenant, Kimura Muyang." Lieutenant. When all division members greeted him in unison, Kimura Muyang was even more confused. He even thought that this might be some kind of trap that the division members laid out for him. Various thoughts flashed in Kimura Muyang's mind. However, he just laughed it off as he greeted everyone. "Haha, hello everyone, I will be your lieutenant from today onwards, pleased to meet you." "Lieutenant, you're so serious. Just tell me if there's something you need." "That's right. Everyone here will definitely do anything you ask." Yeah. Kimura Muyang was even more baffled when he saw how passionate all of them seemed. If it was all an act, then they must be quite an actor. Seeing Kimura Muyang was still responsive despite his puzzled look, Hikifune Kiryu found it really amusing. "I know that all of you must be curious about the new lieutenant. So, feel free to ask if you have any questions. I'm sure that Lieutenant Kimura will be glad to answer." Seeing her division members seemed so eager to know about Kimura Muyang, she left the stage to him and went back to Captain's office. "Captain." Hikifune Kiryu saw Hiyori was standing beside her when she turned her head. "What's wrong, Lil Hiyori? You don't seem too happy." "Captain, why did you pick Kimura Muyang to be our lieutenant?" Hiyori clearly seemed dissatisfied with Kimura Muyang being appointed as the 12th Division lieutenant as she frowned and seemed down when she asked Hikifune Kiryu that question. "What's wrong? Did you have something against him?" She then said as she reached out and patted Hiyori in the head, "If you have a complaint, come to the captain's office with me instead of just standing here." Hiyori clearly enjoyed it when Hikifune Kiryu patted her head with her innocent smile. At moments like this, she sure seemed like another little girl in everyone's eyes, even though she actually was. In the lounge, everyone was flocking onto Kimura Muyang, while he was completely overwhelmed by everyone's enthusiasm. The atmosphere is clearly different from the 12th Division that he knew. "Lieutenant, tell us about the run-in with the 5th Division captain." "Lieutenant, do you mind showing us your Zenjutsu? I heard that you also defeated Lieutenant Asano, the former 9th Division lieutenant." "Lieutenant, I heard that Captain Kurosaki from the 11th Division invited you to visit the 11th Division. What's going on?" "Lieutenant." As he heard the swarm of questions, Kimura Muyang finally understood what was going on here. They all must have heard about what happened today, but he sure didn't expect that their attitude toward him would change this much just because of that. However, that was actually normal. It was just Kimura Muyang was still not used to the norm here where strength decided everything. Now that Kimura Muyang has demonstrated his strength, he was acknowledged by everyone. Even though he didn't end up fighting Watanabe Kiryu, the fact that he was brave enough to challenge a captain already sent a chill down their spine. Besides, both captain and lieutenant were something beyond their reach, so they admired them. After figuring out the reason behind their behavior, the rest was easy. Kimura Muyang asked everyone to have a seat and then answered their questions one by one. As for the questions he couldn't answer, Kimura Muyang just smiled profoundly while they were guessing what the meaning behind that smile was. "Lieutenant, let's hold a banquet to celebrate this occasion." "Huh? Is that okay, fourth seat Tanaka?" Tanaka Tatsui's words left Kimura Muyang wondering. By this time, Kimura Muyang already learned everyone's name, even though they were not close enough to be called friends just yet. "It's okay. Our captain likes banquet anyway." "Well, if you say so. However, be sure to keep it in moderation. Relax, just leave it to us. We will make sure it's a memorable one for you, Lieutenant. Right, everyone?" Of course, it will be a pleasant surprise for Lieutenant. Being surrounded by division members who cared deeply for him, Kimura Muyang was genuinely happy from the bottom of his heart. "You seem to be in high spirits. What were you talking about?" Hikifune Kiryu asked out of nowhere, startling Kimura Muyang. "Kiryu-san, stop popping out of nowhere. It's not good for my heart." "Did I?" Hikifune Kiryu didn't seem to pay it to mind and then immediately asked, "What's everyone talking about? They seem to enjoy themselves." "Captain, we are thinking of holding a welcome party for Lieutenant." There was a trace of excitement in her eyes before she smiled and said, "A banquet? That's what I'm talking about. I will take care of it myself." Kimura Muyang began to have a doubt when he heard Hikifune Kiryu's response. Did Hikifune Kiryu like parties so much that she didn't care it might hinder the division's job? Such thought crossed his mind. Which food should I serve? What should I do? There are too many delicious foods to choose. It was as if Kimura Muyang's expectation of the dreamy Hikifune Kiryu shattered into pieces. To think that his gorgeous captain was a glutton even though her stylish body didn't seem to show any sign of it. Shortly after, Hiyori jumped toward Kimura Muyang's head and then said with a disgruntled tone as she sat on his head, "Hey, Kimura, although Captain appointed you as lieutenant, I won't forgive you if you don't live up to her expectation and put the 12th Division's name to shame." Kimura Muyang finally realized Hiyori was against him taking up the lieutenant's seat because she didn't know how strong he was and suspected that he might drag the 12th Division's reputation down the mud. In short, she just really loved this division. "Of course, I'm the 12th Division lieutenant, after all," Kimura Muyang said proudly. "Ah Hiyori, why did you hit me out of nowhere? Don't get ahead of yourself." In the morning, Kimura Muyang shook his head as he realized that he was drunk again last night. He almost couldn't believe that he has always drunk by himself in his previous life. Although he could hold his liquor, he would get drunk eventually with almost everyone aside from the captain asking for a toast, especially Hiyori, who kept challenging to a drinking contest. However, what surprised Kimura Muyang was Hikifune Kiryu's top-notch skill in cooking. Kimura Muyang never doubted her skill as a Shinigami since she was a captain, but she also turned out to be a talented cook as she cooked all the food herself, leaving Kimura Muyang drooling. "You're finally up, Lil Yang Yang." Hikifune Kiryu's voice welcomed Kimura Muyang as soon as he opened the door, followed by an appetizing aroma that stirred Kimura Muyang's belly. Lil Yang Yang. Although he liked the smell of the food that Hikifune Kiryu cooked, he couldn't say the same about the nickname she came up with. "Kiryu-san, can you please refrain from calling me with that nickname?" Even though he was touched that his captain went so far as to even serve him breakfast, he just couldn't like that nickname she gave him. Then again, the food in front of him was really mouth-watering. Even though he wasn't a big eater, he couldn't resist the temptation of such delicious food. There was a trace of smile on Hikifune Kiryo's face before she said, "Ah, is that so? All right then." She then walked away, bringing the food with her. Seeing Hikifune Kiryo listen to him for once, he was so happy yet confused at the same time. As he saw her taking away the food with her, he hurriedly asked, "Why are you taking away all the food, Kiryo-san?" Hikifune Kiryo then looked back at Kimura Muyang with a smile. "Well, I cooked these for Lil Yangyang, not for Lieutenant Kimura." She deliberately said Lil Yangyang and Lieutenant Kimura louder. The corner of Kimura Muyang's mouth slightly twitched. He realized that Hikifune Kiryo was trying to bribe him with food. "Kiryo-san, you are still." Kimura Muyang waved his hand to show that he wouldn't be tempted by food. "That's too bad. I plan to cook for Lil Yangyang every day, but if he doesn't want it, there's nothing I can do." Hikifune Kiryo pretended to look sad. "Oh, Lieutenant Kimura, did you say something?" Suddenly Hikifune Kiryo said with a curious look on her face, but it was clear what she wanted. Kimura Muyang was in a dilemma. He knew he shouldn't be tempted by food, but being able to eat delicious foods like last night is another story. Seeing Kimura Muyang's conflicted look, Hikifune Kiryo knew he fell to it hook, line, and sinker. However, she kept a poker face, so Kimura Muyang didn't suspect anything. I mean, it's not like you can't. I mean, you're the captain, anyway." Kimura Muyang said awkwardly. He has never tasted anything more delicious than the food he ate last night, and in order to be able to taste that kind of delicacy every day, he no longer cared if he had to swallow his pride. However, only when there's nobody around. Kimura Muyang named his condition. The thought of others hearing him being called with that ridiculous nickname made him shudder. Relax, only Lil Yangyang and me will ever hear about this. It's our little secret." Hikifune Kiryo said as he winked at Kimura Muyang, sending a zap of electricity throughout his body. Hikifune Kiryo's teasing words made Kimura Muyang imagine some indecent things in his mind, which led to his silly grin. "What are you thinking about, Lil Yangyang?" Kimura Muyang snapped back from his fantasy and saw Hikifune Kiryo's smile in front of him. Obviously, he'd be in trouble if he told the truth, so he made up an excuse. I was just thinking how blessed I am to be able to eat your home cooking every day," Kimura Muyang said as soon as he took the food back from Hikifune Kiryo. If Hikifune Kiryo knew what he was thinking just now, she would kill him in the spot for sure. Seeing how honest Kimura Muyang was, Hikifune Kiryo chuckled. She loved to cook, so she was so happy if someone appreciated her cooking. Kimura Muyang immediately shoved the food into his throat like no tomorrow. "Kiryo-san, I am so happy." Kimura Muyang finished his food in no time and burped. This definitely set a new record as he has never eaten that fast before. It was incomparable to the food he ate with Kimura Kanzuya. Hikifune Kiryo smiled proudly. Nothing made her happier than people appreciating her cooking. "Now that you have eaten your fill, hurry to the training ground. I made an exception today since you were drunk last night, but keep in mind there won't be any more exceptions in the future." Having said that, Hikifune Kiryo stood up. However, before she left through the door, she stopped for a brief moment, as if she just remembered something, and then said, I almost forgot. Be a dear and do the dishes, okay?" Hikifune Kiryo then left without even giving Kimura Muyang the time to react. Kimura Muyang was speechless as he still had to do the same chore as he did during his stay with Kimura Kanzuya even after he became a lieutenant now. However, Kimura Muyang just obediently picked up the dirty plates. As long as he could taste the delicious food that Hikifune Kiryo cooked every day, he didn't mind. Hikifune Kiryo left with a triumphant smile on her face. Hiyori never wanted to do the dishes, but now she had someone to do that in her place. Although she loved cooking and eating, she was not a fan of washing the dishes. Kimura Muyang didn't realize that he fell right into the tempting Wani-san's scheme. It has been several months since Kimura Muyang became the 12th Division's lieutenant. After having breakfast, Kimura Muyang, as usual, took some division members to patrol the area that the 12th Division in charge of. Shinigami's job turned out to be relatively easy, especially the 12th Division, which was neither a combatant division nor a division that specialized in treating others like the 4th Division. Thus, they weren't that busy and mostly just patrol around the area they were in charge of. After briefing his subordinates, Kimura Muyang left everything to them and left. There was nothing more important for him than honing his skill. Besides, there was no need for captain or lieutenant to step in if it were just for patrolling. Kimura Muyang used his all-out shunpa, leaving the main street of Siriidai, and arrived at the remote woods in a short amount of time. As Kimura Muyang quietly reached the woods, he concentrated every nerve on his body and vigilantly observed his surrounding, trying to pick up any slight movement. Kimura Muyang's ear slightly twitched when he heard a faint sound and immediately turned around, where he saw Hikifune Kiryu was smiling at him. "You can at least pick up my presence now, Lil Yang. What do you take me for, Kiryu-san? I am technically a lieutenant now, so I must at least be able to do this." Kimura Muyang acted like it was no big deal. That being said, Kimura Muyang knew that Hikifune Kiryu's skill was on another level. Despite being fellow captains, Watanabe Kiryu was nowhere near Hikifune Kiryu's level. Had it not for Bankai, he might be just as strong as Kimura Muyang. Even now, Kimura Muyang still couldn't get a clear read on how strong Hikifune Kiryu truly was. Although she did mention that she was adept at concealing her presence and Ryatsu, Kimura Muyang was still shocked sometimes when she popped out of nowhere. Hikifune Kiryu just smiled and then said, "Don't worry, I know how strong you are. I can safely say that you won't fall short to an average captain, but your Kido is. Well, you don't need me to say any further, right?" Hearing Hikifune's words, Kimura Muyang was a bit embarrassed. His Kido might be considered good back when he was in the academy, but he was too far behind compared to other Godei 13-seated officers, let alone other lieutenants. Almost all lieutenants were good at Zankinsoki, and even though his Zenjutsu, Hakuda, and Hoho exceeded other lieutenants, his Kido was nowhere near their level. That's because I mostly spent my time practicing Zenjutsu, so Kido is just, Kimura Muyang explained embarrassedly. I know. Hikifune Kiryu understood Kimura Muyang's situation and thus immediately added. However, Kido is also important, especially for you. Huh? Kimura Muyang had a puzzled look upon hearing Hikifune Kiryu's remark. Why was Kido especially important for him? You realize that you are a lieutenant, right? And with your aptitude, you can be promoted to captain in no time, so it'd be better if you eliminate any flaw in any aspect. Hikifune Kiryu seemed to have high hopes for Kimura Muyang. Realizing the expectations Hikifune Kiryu had toward him behind her words, Kimura Muyang nodded and immediately smiled. "That depends on how well you teach me, Kiryu-san," followed by a wink. Hikifune Kiryu then replied with a smile, "Relax, Lil Yang, I will be sure to teach you well. That's why I came here today, after all." Kimura Muyang was overjoyed. Recently he felt that he couldn't get any stronger even though he trained his body every day as Cheyenne told. Aside from its amazing impact at the beginning, he barely felt any impact nowadays. Even though mastering Kido itself wouldn't enhance his physical strength, he'd become stronger nonetheless. "Kiryu-san, let's get started right away. I am so excited," Kimura Muyang said anxiously. Hikifune Kiryu lightly smiled and said, "Let's start by showing your Kido. I want to find out how much you can do." Kimura Muyang agreed and then stretched out one of his hands with the other holding it. Based on the gesture, it was safe to say that Kimura Muyang planned to use Shikaho, one of the common Kido taught at the academy. Seeing Kimura Muyang's stance, Hikifune Kiryu secretly thought that Kimura Muyang really didn't take his Kido lessons seriously because his rigid movement was just the exact copy of what he learned at the academy. Ye Lord! Mask of blood and flesh, all creation, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Inferno and pandemonium, the sea barrier surges, march on to the south. As Kimura Muyang finished his incantation, Reisher gathers in his palm, generating an orb of crimson-red energy. Heido number 31. Shikaho. The crimson-red energy was discharged from Kimura Muyang's palm and left a small hole on the tree as it hit it. So, this is the extent of your power. There was a hint of disappointment on Hikifune Kiryu's face when he saw the hole on the tree. Kimura Muyang himself seemed embarrassed. With his Ryatsu, he was supposed to be able to blow away the tree, even with such a low-level Kido. Hikifune Kiryu shook her head slightly before pondering for a while and then said, Kido mainly relies on talent and hard work. Kimura Muyang frowned because he thought that applied to everything, not just Kido. Although you have an immense amount of Ryatsu, and you did manage to use the Kido earlier, you can't unleash the intended firepower because of the lack of control. Kimura Muyang nodded. As Hikifune Kiryu said, he could not properly control his power the moment he realized the Kido. Although he wanted to increase the power output, he just could not seem to channel his Ryatsu into the Kido, so he couldn't produce the firepower as intended. But, Hikifune Kiryu immediately added, with your exquisite Ryatsu control, you should have no problem learning Kido. High-level Kido may not be that easy, but as long as you practice diligently, you should be able to do it. Kimura Muyang nodded. It seemed that it would take some time to figure out Kido, but it was the perfect way to help him become stronger. Furthermore, there was a Kido expert who was willing to teach him. By the way, Kiryu-san, which Kido did you use to restrain me back then? Kimura Muyang was curious what kind of Bakudo that Hikifune Kiryu used to stop his movement back then. He was confident that it should be a number 90's Bakudo. That's, Hikifune Kiryu paused. That's a little trick that I came up with. It's not a traditional Kido, so it wasn't numbered. Kimura Muyang was taken aback. Those who could create their own Kido must have a profound understanding of Kido. Not to mention the Kido that Hikifune Kiryu used back then was powerful too. A fire was lit inside Kimura Muyang, and he immediately asked, Kiryu-san, can you teach me that Kido? Well, you should learn the basics first. That trick is too early for you. Hikifune Kiryu turned Kimura Muyang down without hesitation. Kimura Muyang himself was speechless at how bad he was at Kido as he scratched his head in embarrassment. Starting tomorrow, you have to come here and practice Kido every day, but I will oversee your practice. Hikifune Kiryu walked to Kimura Muyang and poked his nose as she smiled gorgeously. Be sure to take your practice seriously, Lil Yang, don't disappoint this one Isan. Kimura Muyang blushed as he stared at Hikifune Kiryu, who slowly disappeared from his sight. Although he often fell into her scheme, he couldn't resist her charm since he was a virgin even in his second life now. Oh, come on, Kimura. You've become a lieutenant, and you still want me to treat you? Hirako Shinji looked at Kimura Muyang helplessly as the guy in front of him obviously had the highest position among their group. In other words, Kimura Muyang had the highest income yet still wanted him to treat Kimura Muyang. Baldy Shinji, you are in no position to say that. You often come to our barack and join our feast even though you're from the 10th division. Hiyori said in a condescending tone while glaring at Hirako Shinji. Now, there is no way I can refuse Captain Hikifune's homemade cooking. What was it about the 12th division again? Kuna Mashiro curiously asked with a ridiculously adorable expression. Kimura Muyang hurriedly glanced at Hirako Shinji as a warning. Hirako Shinji alone already increased his workload. He shuddered at the thought of any more people coming to their base and joined the feast. He simply couldn't bear washing any more tablewares. No, it's nothing. Hirako Shinji waved his hand, immediately switching to his poker face. Is that so? Kyuna Mashiro looked at Hirako Shinji doubtfully, but when she saw nothing weird about Hirako Shinji, she was back to harassing Kensei. Meanwhile, Lisa just glanced at Kimura Muyang without saying a word. Her captain, Kairaku Shunsui, often visited the 12th Division. She was also acquainted with the 12th Division captain, so she obviously knew what they were talking about. By the way, why didn't Aranmaru come today? Is 11th Division that busy? Love asked out of the blue. Oh, come to think of it, you're right. That annoying babyface didn't come. What's wrong with him? Hiyori wondered after taking a look around her. Because Aranmaru Shirshin was pretty close to Kimura Muyang during their academy days, the rest obviously knew about him. Because of Aranmaru Shishin's appearance, Hiyori has always called him babyface. Coupled with the way he talked, which was, how to put it, tactless and incredibly honest. Apparently so. Kimura Muyang put down his chopsticks and said after a brief pause, "It seems that he is heading to Rukongai to fight Hollow." A Hollow was sighted around that area. Aren't you technically a lieutenant? Why didn't you head out instead? Hirako Shinji teased Kimura Muyang. Hee. Our third seat should be able to handle it. Besides, they're just checking things out, and there's a chance it was just a false alarm. Kimura Muyang was slightly embarrassed because Hirako Shinji had a point, so he just changed the topic with a silly smile on his face, but this shouldn't be a problem for the 11th Division. Even Captain Kurosaki went there in person. There should be nothing to worry about. Captain Kurosaki. A momentary silence covered the room when the name Kurosaki Kenpachi was mentioned. Captain Kurosaki was the most well-known captain right after the captain commander in Gotei 13. No one wouldn't bat an eye when they heard his name. Well, if Captain Kurosaki is with them, then there will be no problem. Love said, breaking the silence. Everyone nodded, agreeing with Love. After all, the title, Kenpachi, is not just for show, especially Kurosaki Kenpachi, whose strength was recognized by everyone in Gotei 13. Schwa. The door was forcefully opened, and as everyone's attention was focused on the door, they saw Aranmaru Shirshin was standing dejectedly by the door. You decided to come now of all time, babyface. Hiyori picked a fight with Aranmaru Shirshin without hesitation the moment she saw him. Hiyori. Hirako Shinji suddenly yelled, but unlike their usual banter, he sounded serious this time. As Hiyori glanced and noticed that there was no trace of the usual silly smile on Hirako Shinji's face, she immediately took a look around and noticed that the rest of them seemed a bit off too. That was when she realized she had made a mistake and immediately shut her mouth. Aranmaru, what's wrong? Kimura Muyang realized something must have happened when he saw Aranmaru Shirshin, who was always spunky and optimistic, seemed dejected like this. Kimura. Hearing Aranmaru Shirshin sobbed shocked everyone. Since when did this guy become such a crybaby? As everyone saw Aranmaru Shirshin's red and swollen eyes, they knew from a glance that he must have cried. Despite his baby face, he was unexpectedly tough, both physically and mentally, so seeing him in this state definitely surprised everyone. Yo, babyface, did someone harass you? Tell me who, and I'll beat them up. Hiyori smacked her own chest to show how dependable she was. Everyone ignored Hiyori and waited for Aranmaru Shirshin's answer. Captain, he's dead. Seeing his friends in front of him, Aranmaru Shirshin was on the verge of tears. Everyone was shocked beyond belief when they heard the news about Kurosaki Kenpachi's death. He was the 11th Division captain. The 7th Kenpachi. How could a man of his caliber die? How is this possible? A man as strong as Captain Kurosaki can't be dead. You've gotta be joking, right Aranma? Kensei couldn't finish his sentence when he saw Aranmaru Shihin's expression. He seemed so sad that this couldn't be a joke. Kimura Muyang took a few deep breaths to regain composure. He had long known that Kurosaki Kenpachi would die in the near future. Otherwise, Zaraki wouldn't become a Kenpachi. However, after meeting Kurosaki Kenpachi in person, he couldn't help but admire him and understood why he earned the respect of many people. Moreover, Kimura Muyang once visited Kurosaki Kenpachi at the 11th Division and sparred with him, the result being Kimura Muyang defeated even with Kurosaki Kenpachi still holding back. So he knew that Kurosaki Kenpachi was no ordinary captain. Who is it, Oranmaru? Who kills Captain Kurosaki? Kimura Muyang asked directly. Everyone's eyes were focused on Oranmaru Shirshin. They were also curious who managed to kill the formidable 11th Division captain. Azashiro Soya. Oranmaru Shirshin uttered a name with bloodshot eyes. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. They've never heard of this name whatsoever. How could a nobody kill one of Gotei 13's captain? And Kurosaki Kenpachi was no ordinary captain to boot. After pondering, Kimura Muyang then said, "So, he'll be called Azashiro Kenpachi from now on." Everyone was taken aback but then nodded. As per the 11th Division's rule, one could become the next captain upon defeating the current captain in front of 200 division members. So, apparently, this person named Azashiro Soya has now inherited the title Kenpachi and 11th Division captain. Oranmaru, what are you planning to do? Kimura Muyang asked because he knew that Oranmaru Shirshin joined the 11th Division because he admired Kurosaki Kenpachi. Now that Kurosaki Kenpachi was killed at the hands of a man named Azashiro Soya would take over as the next 11th Division captain, so Oranmaru Shirshin may not stay in the 11th Division anymore. I don't know what to do. I'm not in the mood to discuss it. Captain, he actually. After this sudden turn of events, everyone was no longer in the mood to continue drinking. The news wasn't known by the public just yet, but it would spread throughout Gotei 13 soon. After all, the death of a captain was no trivial matter, especially a captain with major influence like Kurosaki Kenpachi. No matter how Kimura Muyang looked at it, he realized there was no way to console Oranmaru Shirshin, so he told him to go home. Everyone also headed back to their room, but they didn't know a storm was brewing somewhere else. Footsteps were heard coming from an empty alley, which was especially noticeable in the quiet night. The moonlight illuminated two silhouettes in the middle of the night, one tall silhouette and a short one. Hey! Hiyori called Kimura Muyang as they left the alley. She noticed that Kimura Muyang seemed lifeless ever since he heard the news about Kurosaki Kenpachi's death. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she knew this wasn't the usual Kimura Muyang. Seeing Kimura Muyang ignored her, Hiyori couldn't help but gave him a whooping even though she knew that he might be thinking about something important. Huh? Kimura Muyang, who snapped back to his senses, looked at Hiyori puzzledly. What is it, Hiyori? What's wrong? The veins on Hiyori's forehead popped when he realized Kimura Muyang has been ignoring her this whole time. That's my line, Baldy. Hiyori yelled her lungs out. She thought that Kimura Muyang must have done this on purpose. Seeing Hiyori yelled out of the blue, Kimura Muyang realized what was going on and stroked his head embarrassedly. Sorry, something's in my mind just now. Hiyori stopped throwing a tantrum when she noticed the look on Kimura Muyang's face and then said, Tell me then, I'll hear you out. Kimura Muyang took his time to gaze at the full moon in the sky instead of answering Hiyori's question immediately. Hiyori waited for a while, but she didn't hear any answer from Kimura Muyang. She was mad again at first, but when she noticed Kimura Muyang was gazing at the moon with a profound look, she changed her mind. Kimura Muyang seemed conflicted, with a hint of sorrow. Although he didn't know what Kimura Muyang was thinking, Hiyori knew that he must be worried about something. After all, they've been together for a while. What's wrong, Kimura? Hiyori sounded thoughtful for once. I just wanna ask, can we survive? Kimura Muyang asked worriedly. Hiyori was silent for a moment. She wasn't bright, but she understood the meaning behind Kimura Muyang's words. Apparently, Kurosaki Kenpachi's death didn't only shake Oranmaru Shirshin, but also made Kimura Muyang unsure about the future. Ever since he came to Soul Society, Kimura Muyang has always been looking forward to the day he could meet the protagonist and join them according to the storyline. However, he lost his confidence now that Kurosaki Kenpachi, who defeated him without even using Shirkai, was killed just like that. If a man of Kurosaki Kenpachi's caliber was killed that easily, how about him? Would he even be able to survive until the main story started? Hiyori just stared at Kimura Muyang without saying a word. No one could predict the future, so she didn't know how to answer his question. Negative thoughts now occupied her mind as well. After all, no one wasn't afraid of death, even Shinigamis. You're brooding over it too much, Kimura. A lazy-sounding voice said from behind. Shinji. Hiyori was surprised when she turned around and found that Hirako Shinji was already right behind them. Kimura Muyang also turned around and shifted his attention to Hirako Shinji. I don't know what will happen in the future, but at least I'm well and alive right now. Hirako Shinji said casually in response to Kimura Muyang's demanding gaze, but he definitely sounded serious. Cross the bridge when you come to it. All I know is Captain Hikifune will be in your case if you don't hurry back, Kimura. Oh no, I almost forgot. Kimura Muyang and Hiyori seemed panic. They were in the palm of Hikifune Kiryo's hand. If they did not go back within the specified time, things might not go so well for both of them. Kimura Muyang waved at Hirako Shinji and immediately dragged Hiyori back to the 12th Division. Seeing Kimura Muyang hurried back to the 12th Division, Hirako Shinji just slightly smiled. Kimura, that guy really is. Hirako Shinji shook his head and then rushed back to the 10th Division. Thanks, Shinji. Kimura Muyang quietly thanked Hirako Shinji. Although Hirako Shinji's answer wasn't the solution he was looking for, it was mind-blowing, and it simply made Kimura Muyang realize the most important thing. As he said, just cross the bridge when he comes to it. There was no need to brood over it too much. What fun was left in life if he had to overthink everything? All he had to worry about now was the present, leave the future for later. He already knew about Bleach's main story. What was left to enjoy if he knew everything all the way until the end of the storyline? Wouldn't life be more meaningful exactly because he didn't know what awaited him? Kimura Muyang seemed more cheerful now that a huge load was lifted from his shoulders. However, now that he no longer worried about the future, he was worried about the present. Although he somehow ended up in Bleach's world, the timeline didn't match. He has met several characters that appeared in the anime, but they were still a 3rd seat, 4th seat, or 5th seat even though they were supposed to be captains and lieutenants in the anime like Hirako Shinji and the rest. Although their appearance wasn't that much different, no one knew how long it would take until they reached that position. In other words, he didn't know when the main story would start. But now that the heavy load that weighed down his mind has been lifted, he realized that life must go on. Whether this was Bleach's world or his former world, he had to carry on living. That part didn't change. He realized that his own story had already begun the moment he came to this world. Even if he couldn't see the day when the main storyline began, he must live his life to the fullest. Now that Kimura Muyang has pulled himself together, he was a little more relaxed. However, he realized that he must step up his training. He couldn't let himself fall behind if he wanted to live in this world where strength was everything. How long are you planning to drag me like this? Hiyori desperately shouted. Kimura Muyang turned around and almost fainted when he saw Hiyori nauseating behind him. It turned out he has been dragging Hiyori by force for so long that she almost threw up. He became pale when he imagined that Hiyori would take her revenge for sure. If she did, there was no way he could outrun her. Not when they lived in the same barack and met every day. That's me out, Hiyori. Lil Hiyori, Kimura, what took you guys so long? A certain voice surprised both of them, and they immediately plastered a smile on their faces because it was Hikifune Kiryo's voice. Captain. Kiryo-san. I don't want to hear your excuses. Hikifune Kiryu glanced at them and didn't let them explain their situation. Hiyori, you will be in charge of cooking tomorrow. No. Captain. Hiyori tried to protest. Hikifune Kiryu might as well kill her than telling her to cook. Seeing Hiyori's reaction, Kimura Muyang had a bad feeling. His instinct told him that something bad was about to happen to him. The next moment. Kimura, you'll be responsible for eating Hiyori's homemade cook. Kimura Muyang was pale. Was Hiyori cooking even edible? Hikifune Kiryu then left without giving them a chance to explain themselves, leaving Kimura Muyang and Hiyori looking at each other and sigh. A slick move indeed. Knock knock knock. Hikifune Kiryu, who was looking through the document in her hand, then said, "Come in." After the door was opened and a figure entered, Hikifune Kiryu raised his head and asked curiously, "What is it, Lil Yang? You need something from me?" Kiryu-san, Kimura Muyang seemed a little hesitant. Well I do, but, Hikifune Kiryu was even more curious when she saw the look on Kimura Muyang's face. Judging from Kimura Muyang's personality, she knew that Kimura Muyang must have something important to discuss with her. "I have an idea, and I need your help for that." "Spell it out, then." Hikifune Kiryu's interest was piqued as she put down the document on her hand and tapped the table rhythmically. "I want to develop a special Kido. As you already knew, I suck at Kido, so I need your help." "Oh. Special Kido." Hikifune Kiryu shouted excitedly and then asked again after a brief pause, "What kind of Kido are you talking about here?" Kimura Muyang touched his nose embarrassedly. "Actually, I don't exactly know what kind of Kido it is. I just thought that Kido should be able to do the trick." Hikifune Kiryu was speechless at how thoughtless her lieutenant was. After a sigh, she then said, "Well, I'll be damned. You do realize what you're asking here, right? Screw it, so on and explain. I'll at least hear you out." Kimura Muyang also realized that he was asking too much here, but this was the only way he could think of in order to become stronger. Once he saw Hikifune Kiryu was willing to listen to his ideas, he immediately conveyed them to her. As Kimura Muyang explained, the look on Hikifune Kiryu's face gradually changed. At first, she just listened to get Kimura Muyang off his case, but she was speechless now because his idea was genuinely good. Furthermore, it wouldn't be difficult to create the Kido that Kimura Muyang meant for someone of her caliber. However, "Lil Yang, you want me to create this Kido for your personal use, don't you? How did you even come up with such an extreme idea in the first place?" Hikifune Kiryu said with a serious look on her face. "Indeed, you can become drastically stronger if you restrain your body using Kido, but at the same time, your body would be forced to consume a huge amount of Ryatsu constantly. It will put a heavy load on your body, and worst-case scenario, it might even be life-threatening." Hikifune looked even more serious than before. This Kido might pose a threat to Kimura Muyang's life. If an unforeseen situation arose where Kimura Muyang had to fight, the Kido might delay his reaction time, and that alone might end up fatal. Kimura Muyang just lowered his head while Hikifune Kiryu was waiting for his answer. In any case, in his current state, he wouldn't be able to complete the Kido without Hikifune Kiryu's help. After a brief pause, Kimura Muyang raised his head and looked straight into Hikifune Kiryu's eyes as he said, "Because of Captain Kurosaki." Hikifune Kiryu could clearly see Kimura Muyang's resolve that was reflected in his eyes. She knew it wasn't like Kimura Muyang was thinking about revenge because those two weren't that close to begin with. However, Kurosaki Kenpachi's death was definitely a surprise for Kimura Muyang. Kurosaki Kenpachi was a skilled captain, so his death obviously came as a surprise, leaving everyone restless, and a lieutenant like Kimura Muyang wasn't an exception. Hikifune Kiryu wasn't surprised. In fact, she was more than happy to have such a motivated subordinate, even though Kimura Muyang has always been motivated when it came to honing his skill. Hikifune Kiryu then stood up and said, This keto will place a heavy load on your body, but since you're the one who came up with this idea, you must have realized the risk to a certain extent. I personally want to support you as a captain. Kimura Muyang spontaneously stood up due to excitement. He has always respected Hikifune Kiryu, but it was purely because of her skills. Her words just now, however, made him realize how worthy she was to be the 12th Division captain. Follow me. Hikifune Kiryu then walked toward a certain bookcase and pulled a random book, and the bookshelves suddenly moved apart from each other, revealing a tile different from the rest. She tapped the tile a few times, and a stair leading underground appeared right below the tile. Kimura Muyang was shocked. Did everyone here love the secret room that much? Why are you just standing there like an idiot? Come with me. Hikifune Kiryu then led the way and headed down. As they made their way underground, the torch placed inside the passage lighted their way through the darkness and gave them the full picture of the secret room. It wasn't that big, and for the most part, it resembled a common basement, just like the Urahara Kisuke's place. Kimura Muyang looked around, and he couldn't help but say, Kiryu-san, this place is. Well, I did some experiments here in addition to storing some information in data. Although the principle behind the keto you meant is fairly simple, developing keto is no easy task. I need some references, so here we are. As Kimura Muyang looked around and inspected the underground laboratory, thinking how many equipment and experiments have been conducted here, Hikifune Kiryu's voice snapped him back to his senses. Okay, let's go. Hikifune Kiryu already found the information she needed while Kimura Muyang was busy observing the underground laboratory. Put those books on my table, and you may go. This keto isn't that difficult, so it should be complete in a few days. And don't disturb me for the next few days unless it's urgent. Kimura Muyang rolled his eyes because he realized that he was the one asking favor here, so he had to do as Hikifune Kiryu said. As Kimura Muyang put the books on the table, he said, Is there anything else, Kiryu-san? No, this should be enough. By the way, since our division isn't that busy, you'll have to handle our division's task in my place for the next few days. Make a decision as you see fit. I believe in your judgment. When Hikifune Kiryu noticed Kimura Muyang was about to say something, she immediately added, I know you are very concerned about this keto, but I will be sure to inform you once I'm done with it. She then pushed Kimura Muyang out of her office and closed the door without giving him the chance to say anything. Kimura Muyang sighed as he had mixed feelings about this. Although he knew it was partly because Hikifune Kiryu developed the keto on his request, he knew it was mostly because she was just too lazy to deal with the annoying division affairs and forced it on him instead. Kimura just sighed and smiled wryly. It seemed like he'd be busy for the next few days. What Captain has been up to in the past couple of days? She even left everything to Lieutenant. I don't know. Maybe she was so immersed in her new research. Didn't this happen to third seat Otaku before? Hearing what other division members said, Kimura Muyang just shook his head helplessly. As they said, Hikifune Kiryu has been cooped up in her office ever since she accepted Kimura Muyang's request. He was starting to think that Hikifune Kiryu forgot about him. Handling the division affairs was no easy task, and Kimura Muyang himself realized this after handling it personally. Being a captain truly was not a laughing matter. Ah! Captain! Captain! A few division members who happened to be standing near the door suddenly saluted. Kimura Muyang immediately turned around, where he saw the exhausted-looking Hikifune Kiryu in front of the door. It was clear that the past few days had been rough for her. However, there was a hint of joy on her face. Hikifune Kiryu waved her hand as a sign that the rest didn't have to bother with the pleasantries before turning to Kimura Muyang and said, Come with me, Kimura. It's done. Are you sure you don't want to take a break, Kiryu-san? Kimura Muyang hesitated when he saw Hikifune Kiryu took the lead at her current state. She obviously didn't rest at all in the past couple of days. It's okay. I know my body better than anyone. Don't just stand there like an idiot. Hurry up. Hikifune Kiryu said indifferently, followed by a laugh. Kimura Muyang said no more and obediently followed Hikifune Kiryu. As they kept walking, he realized they were heading towards the training room. However, as far as he remembered, most rooms around the training room were basically unused because the 12th division wasn't a combat-specialized division. Thus, most members were not that interested in sparring or combat. Hikifune Kiryu stopped in front of a certain door and said, "Stay back." After Kimura Muyang took a few steps back, Hikifune Kiryu reached out as if touching something invisible to the naked eye. With a slight force behind her hand, a blinding light flashed, and a transparent spiritual energy that looked like a barrier emerged in front of the door. After Hikifune Kiryu muttered something, his hand was shrouded by light, and the transparent barrier in front of her disappeared like a huge glass shattering into pieces. This barrier is another implementation of Kido. Hikifune Kiryu explained, but this is too advanced for you now. It'll take a while before you can master Kido to this degree. Kimura Muyang nodded as he realized his own capability. I understand, but just what room is this, Kiryu-san? Why does it have a barrier? Laboratory. Hikifune Kiryu then further explained, we conducted some dangerous experiments here, after all. I must cover the whole room with a barrier. Otherwise, the whole barrack may go down. Hikifune Kiryu already opened the door and walked in as she explained. Kimura Muyang immediately followed behind her because he was afraid that he couldn't enter if he took his time. After Kimura Muyang entered, Hikifune Kiryu put his hand together. A certain Kido quickly covered the whole room, and she immediately explained once again because Kimura Muyang still seemed puzzled, this is to prevent the impact on the outside world. Although I heard this building contains sekiseki, which can block erasure, it's not completely made of sekiseki because it's so rare and precious, and we can't just waste it all on one building. Thus, it's better to be safe than sorry. After erecting the barrier, Hikifune Kiryu shifted her attention to Kimura Muyang and said with a serious look, I have developed the Kido that you want. Your idea does make sense, and that Kido indeed can help you. Even so, I have to ask once again, are you sure you want to use this dangerous method? Kimura Muyang just lightly smiled, of course. No pain, no gain. I'm ready for the risk. Seeing the look on Kimura Muyang's face, Hikifune Kiryu realized that he had made his resolve, and it was pointless to persuade him at this point. Well, since you've made up your mind, shall we, then? Put your hands together. Hikifune Kiryu said as she pointed a finger towards Kimura Muyang. A bright yellow light emanated from her fingertip, and it didn't seem like any ordinary light. Kimura Muyang took a deep breath as he put his hands together, and Hikifune Kiryu made a circular motion around Kimura Muyang's hand using her fingertip. The bright yellow light then suddenly tightened and bound Kimura Muyang's hand. Without giving Kimura Muyang the time to react, Hikifune Kiryu did the same to his feet. Kimura Muyang suddenly lost his balance as both of his hands and feet were tied up, but he managed to buffer the fall with his hands. How do you feel? Hikifune Kiryu asked with a smile. You definitely did that on purpose, didn't you, Kiryu-san? Kimura Muyang said as he turned his body around. Ah, how can you say that, Lil Yang? I can't believe you're so mean to me. Hikifune Kiryu pretended to be dejected because of Kimura Muyang's words. Kimura Muyang rolled his eyes as he knew Hikifune Kiryu was teasing him on purpose. As Kimura Muyang tried to stand back up, he had a hard time moving his wrist and ankles. Thus, he nodded in satisfaction and said, a very powerful binding. Of course, I designed it to restrain even a captain. Are you having a second thought, Lil Yang? Captain, Kimura Muyang murmured. Kimura Muyang slightly shook the head. Although the binding was very powerful, that wouldn't discourage him. Kimura Muyang roared lightly, discharging immense ryatsu, and successfully freed his wrist and ankle. Although both of his hands and feet were no longer bound to each other, the Kido reapplied to each of his limbs. It was like a magnet that was drawn to each other, restricting his movement. Lil Yang, your Ryatsu is even stronger than an average captain. I didn't expect that you've come this far. Kimura Muyang just blushed when he heard Hikifune Kiryo's compliment. He didn't say anything back because he realized that he still had ways to go before he could be compared to a captain, especially the senior captains. Does it take everything you got to keep this up? Hikifune Kiryo asked. No, it certainly is tough, but it takes up about 80% of my power to stand normally. Kimura Muyang shook the head said frankly. But it will be a little troublesome at this rate. Kiryo-san, it seems I have to take a few days off. Well, I know you still have to get used to it first. You can't even suppress your Ryatsu, and it constantly disperses at your current state. If you go out there like this, the weaker division members may not be left unscathed. I know. Kimura Muyang also knew that he might endanger others if he went out there carelessly. He had to maintain this level of Ryatsu at all times to move, but the others might fall victim to his Ryatsu as it constantly disperses. Not to mention, it put a huge load on his body. By the way, Lil Yang, what should we call this Kido? You came up with this idea, and you're the one I use it on, so give it a name. Name? Kimura Muyang pondered for a while. Let's call it Hakuraisa for now. Just what the hell is going on? First, Captain was cooped up inside her office for a week, and now it's Lieutenant's turn to coop up in that room. Yeah, the first thing Captain did was took Lieutenant to that unused room. Captain herself came out of that room shortly after, but that wasn't the case for Lieutenant. I'm confused. Tell me about it. Soul Society is so restless lately. At first it was the 7th Division's captain, now even Captain Kurosaki, who has borne the title Kenpachi for several hundred years, was killed. Now we don't know what's up with our captain and lieutenant. Hiyori just looked helplessly at her fellow division members, who seemed dispirited after discussing how restless Soul Society recently was. That bastard Kimura. Hiyori turned his head towards the room where Kimura Muyang was cooped up, and there was a hint of uneasiness in her tone. Just what the hell is that bastard up to? I'm gonna teach him a lesson once he comes out. 8th Division. Captain, so this is where you are slacking off this time. Lisa sighed helplessly at Kairaku Shunsui, who was sleeping on the roof. How could he shove all the work on her lieutenant while he was slacking off here? Yo, Lisa-chan. Kairaku Shunsui said below his straw hat with his usual sloven tone. I've been upset lately for some reason. Lisa was shocked to hear Kairaku Shunsei's words, and with his straw hat covering his face, she couldn't see his face clearly. Captain, are you still regretting about what happened to Captain Kurosaki? Lisa said softly. There is nothing to regret. It is Kuroshiki's own choice. If I saved him back then, that would be disrespecting his resolve. Well, Lisa turned aside. Everyone has their own resolve and things they can't give up on after all. Whoa, you sound so mature, Lisa-chan. Kairaku Shunsui immediately sat up and looked at Lisa with a smirk. It seems that the lil Lisa-chan had grown up before I realized it. Bang! Kairaku Shunsui kicked Kairaku Shuensui's head and left after fixing her skirt. Lisa-chan, why are you so cold to your captain? I'm so sad. Kairaku Shunsui mourned as he watched sassy Lisa slowly disappearing from his sight. Sigh, she's not cute at all now ever. It must be because of Hiyori's influence. Kairaku Shunsui then gazed at the dark clouds in the sky, and after a brief pause, he profoundly said, a storm is coming. At the same time, 1st Division Captain's office. Captain Commander Yamamoto's eyes were fixated on the dark clouds rumbling in the sky. Captain Commander. How is the investigation going, Chojiro? Yes, according to our investigation, there's nothing suspicious about Asashiro Kenpachi, and he's also qualified as a Shinigami. It's just. What is it? He seems too capable and too obsessed with something. Captain Commander Yamamoto's eyes that were partially closed slit most of the time was slightly opened, and then said solemnly, "If there's no problem, remove him from our surveillance." 2nd Division Captain's Office. Shihoin Masaaki was deep in thought when he looked through the report from his men and murmured, removing the surveillance as a pretense, while having Onmitsukido monitor him in secret, huh? This is not gonna be that easy. What kind of person was Asashiro Soya? What was he planning? Did he pose any threat to Soul Society? These questions occupied Shihoin Masaaki's mind. He couldn't connect the dots, so at the moment, all he could do was observing to prevent any accident or problem from happening. Yo, Dad. That's quite a frown you got there. Shihoin Yoruchi was already sitting next to Shihoin Masaaki and stared at him curiously while eating a cookie in her hand. Seeing how sloven and unladylike his daughter was, Shihoin Masaaki was at a loss for words. Shihoin clan was one of the 4 noble families, yet his daughter didn't show a shred of dignity. Even so. Yoruchi, your Shuunpa is good as always that even I didn't see you coming. Fortunately, he lived up to Shihoin clan's expectation when it came to talent, if anything. A Shuunpa of this level is nothing. You're probably the only one who didn't see me coming, Dad. Yoruchi blatantly said while waving her hand. Shihoin Masaaki was speechless when he heard his daughter's frank evaluation of himself. It's alright, Dad. I know what you're going to say. I won't laugh at you, nor will I lose respect for you, so rest assured. Yoruchi said before Shihoin Masaaki could finish his sentence. Shihoin Masaaki burst into tears seeing his daughter didn't even give him a chance to defend himself. 5th Division. Captain, this is the perfect chance. A long, fair-haired man with a black shawl said to Watanabe Kiryu with a nonchalant look. Oh ho. Watanabe Kiryu asked curiously, tell me then, Senjio, what chance do you mean? Yes, Captain. He bowed his head respectfully, and the man named Senjio continued, this new Kenpachi is intriguing. He deliberately killed the 11th Division's former captain instead of taking the vacant captain's seat at the 7th or 10th Division. I'm sure he must have a plan. Watanabe Kiryu's eyes lit up as Senjio's analysis seemed to be intriguing. Go on. Besides, this man can defeat that Kurosaki Kenpachi, so there's no need to doubt his capability. I suggest you ally yourself with him, Captain. That way, you can gain more influence and have a greater say among the captains in Siriidii. Watanabe Kiryu's eyes flashed with excitement, and he walked toward the man named Senjio. As expected of my capable subordinate. You did a good job, Senjio. Thank you for your compliment. Despite thanking Watanabe Kiryu, Senjio's face clearly didn't reflect a shred of gratitude as it remained indifferent. Watanabe Kiryu knew his subordinate very well, so he didn't mind Senjio's attitude as that was just how he was and simply patted his shoulder. Then I will take my leave, Captain Watanabe. Alright, I almost forgot, summon Watanabe Ichiro to my room. Yes. After leaving the captain's office, the expressionless man walked straight towards the training ground. Lieutenant Ryazaki. Lieutenant. Every division member saluted him as he passed through, but he just ignored all of them. Even so, they weren't bothered at all as they were accustomed to their lieutenant's attitude. Senjio walked through the training ground and found Watanabe Ichiro, who was sweating profusely due to rigorous training, so he walked up to him and said, "Fifth seat Watanabe, Captain Watanabe is waiting for you in his office." Watanabe Ichiro heard it and immediately turned around. Understood, Lieutenant Ryazaki. I'll head over right away. Watanabe Ichiro then took a towel and wiped the sweat on his body. Even though he addressed Senjio as lieutenant, there was not a hint of respect in his tone. After tucking his zanpakuto on his sash, Watanabe Ichiro headed towards the captain's office, passing by Senjio with a condescending look. Senjio still seemed indifferent even after seeing Watanabe Ichiro's condescending look as if he didn't mind at all. However, When Watanabe Ichiro went past him, he smirked, and a glance of disdain was clear in his eyes. "Yo, Muyang. Why are you so sluggish lately?" Hirako Shinji listlessly asked Kimura Muyang, who was leaning on the table lazily. "You are one to talk, dumbass Shinji." Hiyori mercilessly snapped at Hirako Shinji, who was also leaning on the table beside Kimura Muyang. "Then again, Muyang is a lieutenant in our division, unlike you." "Huh? Is Muyang a lieutenant?" Kyuna Mashiro stared at Kimura Muyang wonderingly with her cute eyes, "But where's his armband?" "Well, there's no reason for him to wear that kind of thing all the time anyway." "Wait a minute, so you don't know he's the lieutenant up until now?" Kensei sighed at the silly yet cute Kyuna Mashiro. "That being said, it has nothing to do with being a lieutenant, Hiyori. Just look at Captain Karaku, he is always lazy." Love Akawa lifts the head to watch Hiyori earnestly said. The look on Lisa's face clearly changed. The frown on her face clearly meant that what Love said rang a bell. Bang! Ouch! Both Kimura Muyang and Hirako Shinji looked up surprisedly. "What are you hitting me for, Lisa?" Kimura Muyang grumbled while rubbing his head. "Even I got hit by a sake bottle." "What did I do?" Hirako Shinji added. Hiyori smiled with satisfaction on the side. Nothing made Hiyori happier than seeing them suffer at Lisa's hands. Bang bang bang. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed throughout Siriidii, and the tavern where Kimura Muyang and the rest hung out became quiet all of a sudden. Emergency notification, emergency notification. Every division captain is to gather at 1st Division's barracks immediately. An emergency arises at the White Road Gate, and captain's meeting will be immediately held to discuss this. Something big must happen if they go as far as holding a captain's meeting. Kimura Muyang immediately stood up, and the sloven look on his face was replaced by cautiousness. Everyone nodded and immediately wrapped their hangout up. With that emergency notice just now, Siriidii Godii 13 would be on guard. Although they didn't know what happened yet, it was definitely not a trivial matter. "Hiyori, let's hurry back. We can't afford to sit idly at a time like this as a member of the 12th Division. Besides, our division should be the first one to find out about what happened." "Yes, Lieutenant." Kimura Muyang waved his hands at the crowd and then immediately disappeared in front of them along with Hiyori. "We should go too. This doesn't happen so often. I have a feeling this is gonna be a big deal." Hirako Shinji had a quite solemn expression on his face despite the complaint. Schwa they all disappeared from sight as they made their way to their respective divisions. At the same time, 1st Division, Assembly Hall. Dong! Captain Commander Yamamoto's eyes were wide open as he slammed his cane to the ground, followed by his overwhelming aura. "We got an emergency at hand." According to the report from a Shinigami stationed at the White Road Gate, the 11th Division Captain, Azashiro Kenpachi, bore malicious intent to Siriidii. Although the reason behind it is still unknown, he's already at the point where he poses a threat to the stability of the Soul Society. Now I'll select 3 captains to head to the scene and deal with this situation immediately. Arrest Azashiro Kenpachi, and execute him on the spot if he resists. All captains stood straight upon hearing the awe-inspiring briefing from Captain Commander Yamamoto. 3rd Division Captain Sanada Shino, 5th Division Captain Watanabe Kari, 9th Division Captain Nishino Kenji, the 3 above are to head to the scene and deal with the problem immediately. 2nd Division Captain Shihin Masaaki will be on standby until further other orders are issued. 6th Division Captain Kuchiki Jinrei, 8th Division Captain Karaku Shunsui, and 13th Division Captain Yukitake Shur will be responsible for guarding Siriidii. The 12th Division Captain Hikifune Kiryu is to closely monitor Soul Society and Human World. Report any irregularities if you find any. 4th Division Captain Unohana Retsu is to stand by in case we have casualties and stays at Coordinated Relief Station. Now, the 3 captains above, Sanada Shino, Watanabe Kari, and Nishino Kenji, off you go. 3 Captain nodded and instantly disappeared from the assembly hall. Dismiss. First Kurosaki, and now Asashiro, Soul Society is so restless lately. Kuraku Shunsui said while holding the tip of his bamboo hat. Kuraku Yukitake sure couldn't say anything back. Don't mind me. Kuraku Shunsui waved his hand when he saw his close friend was worried about him. I just get a little bit emotional, that's all. After all, both Kurosaki and Asashiro are good people. Asashiro Kenpachi's ideas are too extreme, and his paranoia is dangerous for himself. Hikifune Kiryu interjected. There's also that Kuraku Shunsui said with a mysterious look on his face. Yukitake, can you come with me for a moment? There's something I'm concerned about. Huh? Oh, sure. What is it, Kuraku? It's no big deal, actually. I just want you to accompany me somewhere, that's all. Noticing Kuraku Shunsui whispered to Yukitake sure, Hikifune Kiryu thoughtfully leave them alone. Captain. Kiryu-san. Kimura Muyang and Hiyori rushed back as fast as possible to the 12th Division and saw a familiar figure once they were close enough to the headquarters. You guys actually come back. I thought you'd be staying with Shinji for a while. Kiryu-san, you know this isn't the time to be joking, right? What is happening? What's the emergency notice all about? Kimura Muyang asked with a serious expression. To put it simply, we found that Asashiro Kenpachi may cause harm to Soul Society, but don't worry, Captain Commander had dispatched 3 captains to deal with this problem. Asashiro Kenpachi. Kimura Muyang was silent for a moment. What's wrong, Muyang? Hiyori asked strangely, and Hikifune Kiryu also turned around, looking strangely at Kimura Muyang. Nah, it's just that Captain Asashiro seems really rational, and even though he seemed cold and aloof most of the time, he is a good Shinigami. I never thought he'd. Don't worry about it, Asashiro Kenpachi is indeed an excellent Shinigami, and he is not wrong, but everyone has their own belief and sense of justice. Our own belief and sense of justice, huh? Hikifune Kiryu's words seemed to help Kimura Muyang understand, albeit not entirely. He then followed Hikifune Kiryu back to the barracks. Lieutenant, pull yourself together. Hikifune Kiryu tried to snap Kimura Muyang back to his senses and briefed all the rest of the division members. During this emergency, our 12th Division will be responsible for monitoring Soul Society in human world. Immediately report anything out of place to prevent more problems from occurring during this critical juncture. Take your position. Pull yourself together and be sure not to make any mistakes, Lieutenant Kimura. At once, Captain. Hikifune nodded as that was a proper response as her lieutenant. Take some of our division members with you to patrol around our headquarters. You must ensure your subordinates' safety. They're your responsibility, after all. Yes, I will be on guard at all times and make sure nothing threatened our division. That's more like it. Hikifune Kiryu's eyes shifted somewhere else as if knowing something was happening in that direction. She could sense the clash of Ryatsu coming from that direction. It has finally begun. The entire Soul Society was busy. All Shinigami was doing their own jobs in an orderly manner as the whole Siriidii was restless. Siriidii West Gate White Road Gate. Gatekeeper, H.R. Jiden stood in front of the door and roared loudly. Ha 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 ha. Very good. You are the first person who can take on my axe. But it won't go the same way next time. Jiden then immediately used his deadly technique, Juppen Jidanda Matsuri. Jiden swung his enormous axe, which was almost as heavy as a small boat, 10 times in a row. Gatekeeper's job was protecting the gate. There was nothing out of place aside from the blow of that gigantic axe being blocked. However, unlike usual, Jiden was facing Siriidii this time instead of Rukongai, as if preventing anyone from leaving Siriidii. After several seconds, all that was left in front of Jiden was a big hole after around 35 consecutive strikes. Oh crap, I went too far. Jiden, who thought he had crushed his opponent into smithereens, was celebrating his hollow victory. Meanwhile, a man who Jiden thought was supposed to be smithereens by now was walking nonchalantly toward the opposite direction, completely unscathed. The man had long black hair kept tied in a ponytail with a golden band that would belong to that of royalty, except for 2 long strands on opposite sides of his forehead that hung downwards. The gentle and docile appearance of his was unwavering as there was not even a speck of dust on his clothes. Although he could feel the gaze of Rukongai's residence, he kept walking forward without a care. However, a few seconds later, the man stopped and vigilantly stared as if there was something in front of him. In the next moment, 2 men appeared before Asashiro Kenpachi, blocking his advance. One was a gentle-looking man with white hair, and the other was a man wearing a pink, flowered lattice kimono and a bamboo hat. It was Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake Sure. Good grief, seems like waiting for you here was the right move. So you did manage to defeat those 3, huh? It's just as you said, Kairaku. Asashiro really is stronger than an average captain. Even with 2 of them blocking his way, Asashiro Kenpachi was unfazed and said indifferently, if you agree with my idea, then I hope you can assist me with it. If you don't, I advise you to stay out of this since it'll be just a waste of Ryuryoku. Now that's a tough idea to agree with. Karaku Shunsui said as he untied the knot of his bamboo hat and faced Asashiro directly. The idea of turning Rukongai's people into soldiers to storm Hueco Mundo is too extreme that I can't agree with it. Central 46 is just overly cautious and refuses my idea to save their own ass. As far as I know, those guys had no desire to change things and were satisfied with just maintaining the status quo. I believe you 2 realized that as well, right? Asashiro Kenpachi said indifferently. But, of course, the 2 captains' answer didn't please him. Well, you might be right. It would be so much easier if they want some change. Even so, surely there are other better ways to deal with this, no? Asashiro, I know that you're doing this for the greater good, but your method is a problem. 2 of us stood here out of our own free will. It has nothing to do with Central 46. A clear rejection. Seeing Asashiro Kenpachi had no intention to back away, Karaku Shunsui disappointedly said. But boy, this is a hassle. You did defeat 3 captains easily by yourself. Old Yamamoto seriously underestimated your strength. Karaku Shunsui then took off his flashy kimono, followed by a sigh. Upon seeing Asashiro Kenpachi was about to take out something that resembled a bottle, Karaku Shunsui immediately responded with a lazy tone, let me tell you beforehand, it's pointless to bribe me with sake. This is a problem. Are you sure you don't want to see it first? Karaku Shunsui wavered a little while Yukitake Sure next to him interrupted, indeed, our mission is to defeat Hollow and maintain the balance between Soul Society and human world. However, I don't think using Rukongai's residence as the instruments of war is against my moral compass. Apparently, Yukitake Sure was hell-bent on persuading Asashiro Kenpachi. However, Asashiro Kenpachi obviously wouldn't change his mind just because of his little speech. Asashiro completely ignored him and shifted his attention to Karaku Shunsui instead. Karaku Shunsui, you should know what I'm talking about, right? Although you seem laid back most of the time, you will do anything when it's do or die time, right? You overestimate me. I'm not the type of guy who would use any means necessary to achieve my goal. Is that so? I'd say you're the most cautious captain aside from Captain Commander. Oh well, whatever you say. Asashiro Kenpachi immediately continued, ensuring the balance between Soul Society and human world is the priority for us Shinigamis. Just like the Hell Guards that always punish sinners for eternity, we must also cast aside our emotions to do our duty. Feeling and emotions are not unnecessary in our job. All history and tradition in Soul Society is just a shackle that prevents us from accomplishing our mission, and it's all because of Central 40's excess incompetence. You're clearly mistaken. Our sense of morality is fundamentally different. Soul Society's laws and rules may be mistaken at times, but at least, not now. So that's how it is then, there is no need for another word. Asashiro Kenpachi walked toward the two captains. You aren't going to disappear into thin air as usual. Asashiro Kenpachi did not answer Karaku Shunsui's question. As Asashiro Kenpachi took another step, both Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire put their hands on scabbard at the same time. When the flower wind rages, the flower god roars, when the wind of heaven rages, the god of the underworld sneers, Kaiten Kaikatsu. Waves, become my shield, lightning, become my blade, Tsujiyo no Kodawari. These two veteran captains immediately used their shurikai right off the bat. After all, they were up against a Kenpachi who could defeat 3 captains without even a scar on him. It's futile. Asashiro Kenpachi slowly raised his hand, aiming it at Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire as he began a kid's incantation. However, he stopped without finishing his incantation. Ignoring both Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire, Asashiro Kenpachi turned around and stared at the corner of Siriaides' wall in the distance, whispering, "So even Soul King disapproves my action? What are you talking about?" Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire did not quite catch what Asashiro Kenpachi murmured about, but what they did realize was the indifferent Asashiro Kenpachi finally showed emotion on his face. However, before they realized what it was, the slight change in Asashiro Kenpachi's face was gone, and he put down his hand. "All right, I give up. I will obediently accept the trial from Central 46. Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire frowned and looked at each other in doubt. "What's with you all of a sudden, Asashiro? Your response completely throws me off." Karaku Shunsui stared at Asashiro Kenpachi doubtfully. "Could it be that you have another plan?" "Karaku, you are too skeptical." Asashiro Kenpachi then turned back. "Or are you saying that I should go back by myself?" Hearing Asashiro Kenpachi's words, Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire had no choice but to cast away their doubts and escorted Asashiro Kenpachi back to Siriaidei. What the hell? Does he have a twin or something? Seeing that the man that was supposed to turn into smithereens because of him was escorted by Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire, Jidam's eyes almost bulged out. The White Road Gate sustained minor damage. Thankfully, a damage of that scale should be able to be repaired in a few days. "No, your technique is just so powerful that you blow him so far away." Karaku Shunsui came up with a random answer, but Asashiro Kenpachi did not deny it and remained silent. "So that's how it is. That must be it. I thought I blow him into smithereens, and I was worried about how to bury him." Jiden was relieved and mentioned Asashiro Kenpachi in such a frivolous manner. "Now, take this opportunity to learn your lesson. Don't fight near the gate next time. You can see the gate is damaged because of your fight, right? Fight? Forget it. The rabbles on the other side are not worth mentioning anyway." Hearing the gatekeeper's words, Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire frowned. As far as he remembered, only the 3rd Division, 5th Division, and the 9th Division captain were defeated at the hands of Asashiro Kenpachi, yet what were the rabbles all about? 3 of them went past Jiden and walked back to Siriaides' area. Although Karaku Shunsui and Yukatakeshire were prepared for this, they couldn't help but gasp upon seeing hundreds of Shinigamis lying on the ground past the gate. Although they all seemed lifeless, no one died. The 4th Division was rushing toward them to treat them because they couldn't even stand. "You should teach that gatekeeper the difference between ordinary Shihakush and a Captain Haori. He was lucky that I am forgiving. Had it been another captain, that gatekeeper might die in vain by now." Asashiro Kenpachi indifferently said as if he had nothing to do with the scene in front of him. Of course, the other 2 captains, who were escorting him, heard him clearly. "All of these are your doing." "I did expect this to some extent, but seeing it in person is something else entirely. Yukitake sure could not hide the shock on his face. He did realize that Asashiro Kenpachi was really skilled, but not this skilled. That aside, why are there only Captain Sanada from the 3rd Division and Captain Nishino from the 9th Division? Karaku Shunsui pointed at the 2 captains who were receiving treatment. Where's the 5th Division Captain Watanabe Carey? Yukitake sure immediately took a look around and finally noticed that Watanabe Carey was nowhere to be found. That was when he turned towards Asashiro Kenpachi with an inquiring look. You mean that shameless guy? Asashiro Kenpachi said with a sarcastic tone and eyes full of disdain and contempt, maybe he already escaped out of fear by now. What? Even Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure, who were calm most of the time, couldn't help but gasp when they heard Asashiro Kenpachi's remark. What the hell is going on? I demand an explanation, Asashiro Kenpachi. Karaku Shunsui sounded serious as he put his hand on his Zanpakuto, ready to draw it any second. After all, what Asashiro Kenpachi said was simply hard to believe. Why did a captain choose to desert in the first place? Karaku Shunsui suddenly remembered how Asashiro Kenpachi gave himself up so easily earlier, which was clearly odd. Were these 2 things related somehow? And what role did Asashiro Kenpachi play in this? Seeing Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure was so cautious that they were ready to draw their Zanpakuto at any second, Asashiro Kenpachi smiled, there's no need to get all worked up. There's nothing in it for me to lie about this. Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure let their guard down slightly because of Asashiro Kenpachi's answer. Indeed, Asashiro Kenpachi was not the kind of person who would resort to cheap tricks. He had his pride that wouldn't allow him to stoop that low. Even if you're telling the truth, I can't afford to let my guard down. Karaku Shunsui said with a helpless expression on his face, but his hands were still on the hilt, ready to make a move anytime. Asashiro Kenpachi didn't mind because he knew Karaku Shunsui very well. He knew Karaku Shunsui, who seemed like a laid-back guy and loafing around all the time, was actually a sharp and cautious guy, so Asashiro Kenpachi didn't even think about making any funny move. Those 2 captains are severely injured. I'll take it from here. A soft voice said from the place where the wounded were treated. Captain Unohana. I heard that the 3rd Division and 9th Division captains suffered serious injuries, so I came in person. Unohana Retsu glanced at Asashiro Kenpachi, who was escorted by Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure before turning the other way. Are there injuries that serious? Yukitake sure asked. Unohana Retsu examined the injuries that both captains sustained and said, well, it's a severe injury that almost damages the internal organs. Their life may be in danger if they aren't treated immediately. Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure's complexion changed. There were currently 2 vacant captain seats in Godii 13. Had they lost these 2 captains in front of them, Soul Society would be in peril if something happened. Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure looked at each other, and there was a trace of worry in their eyes. But what bothers me is their wounds are on the back, which is odd. Unohana Retsu examined the 2 captains' wounds for a moment, but then she seemed shocked all of a sudden. This lingering Ryatsu belongs to Captain Watanabe. Karaku Shunsui and Yukitake sure looked at each other, and their worries turned out to be true. They had a feeling that was the case when Asashiro Kenpachi said it earlier. They couldn't really bring themselves to believe that Watanabe Carey might betray Soul Society when Asashiro Kenpachi mentioned him earlier because they still couldn't figure out the purpose behind Watanabe Carey's betrayal. However, they did realize what kind of person Asashiro Kenpachi was, and they could safely say that he wouldn't lie in this kind of circumstance. Perhaps Asashiro Kenpachi's idea did go against Soul Society's guidelines, but his motive and intention were pure. He believed in his own justice, it just happened that his justice contradicts Soul Society's moral compass. Things are getting more and more troublesome. Karaku Shunsui said with a helpless tone while tilting down his straw hat. But first, let's take Asashiro back to old Yamamoto. Well, leave it to old Yamamoto to deal with the punishment for the 5th Division captain. Lieutenant, there is nothing out of place nearby. Have a look once again. This is a crucial time. Be sure to check thoroughly. Yes. Kimura Muyang could at least breathe a sigh of relief, knowing the commotion didn't affect the 12th Division's jurisdiction. Suddenly, Kimura Muyang felt a familiar Ryatsu and gazed at the white road gate in the distance. He couldn't mistake this Ryatsu for someone else's. It was definitely Watanabe Carey's. Ever since the day Watanabe Carey humiliated him in public, he has always remembered his Ryatsu, and upon sensing that familiar Ryatsu, he couldn't contain his anger. However, as far as Kimura Muyang remembered, 3rd Division Captain Sanada Shino and 9th Division Captain Nishino Kenji were also with Watanabe Carey. Although he has only met them a couple of times, and Kimura Muyang still remembered their Ryatsu, but judging from the fluctuation of their Ryatsu, Kimura Muyang speculated that the two captains were attacked, and the attacker is. Kimura Muyang immediately called Sutaku Byakuya. Byakuya, I'll leave things to you here. I have something to do. Kimura Muyang immediately used Shunpa before Sutaku Byakuya could even answer, rushing toward where Watanabe Carey was. As Watanabe Carey said, attacking a captain was considered a serious crime, so he'd be the one taking his life. Lieutenant Kimura. Kimura Muyang already disappeared from his sight before Sutaku Byakuya could even say anything. He just sighed as Kimura Muyang himself was the one who affirmed that this was a crucial time, yet he ran off on his own despite being a lieutenant. Sutaku Byakuya shook his head helplessly, wondering if he should report this to Captain. Ah! Captain! Why are you here? The moment Sutaku Byakuya turned around, he saw Hikifune Kiryu was already behind him, unfazed as she gazed towards where Kimura Muyang was heading. Sutaku Byakuya didn't know what was on his captain's mind, so he took the initiative to tell her about Kimura Muyang. Captain, Lieutenant Kimura is. Hikifune Kiryu shook her head slightly and interrupted before Sutaku Byakuya could finish his sentence. He knows what he is doing, you don't have to explain. I'll leave everything here to you, I have to attend the captain's meeting. Realizing that the captain entrusted the 12th Division to him in this situation, Sutaku Byakuya didn't want to let her down. Don't worry, Captain. Leave the rest to me. Of course, I know how capable you are. Hikifune Kiryu slightly nodded before she turned around and hurried to the 1st Division. Everyone, pull yourself together. It's the time for the 12th Division to shine. Even though all division members were in high spirits, Sutaku had a bad feeling, especially because the captain meeting was held again within such a short amount of time. Not only that, Kimura Muyang's strange behavior earlier really left him wondering. Lil Yang, do you know what you are doing right now is acting without orders? That's against the rules. Is he really too young to be a lieutenant? Hikifune Kiryu was worried about Kimura Muyang even as she was on her way toward the 1st Division. She began to wonder what was Kimura Muyang thinking about in order to make such a reckless move. Not to mention the opponent he'd be facing was the 5th Division captain. Even though Kimura Muyang was about as strong as a captain, he couldn't use Bankai like the captains. The surroundings immediately changed as Kimura Muyang rushed as fast as he could with Shunpa, and Watanabe Carey's Ryatsu was getting more vivid as he kept going. Watanabe Carey seemed to constantly change his route to avoid pursuit, but it was pointless against him. Aside from Watanabe Carey's, Kimura Muyang could also feel someone else's Ryatsu. It was somehow familiar. Judging from the intensity, it probably belonged to a 4th or 5th seat, but he couldn't figure out whose Ryatsu was that, so he decided to stop thinking about it as he'd know who it was once he caught up anyway. 1st Division Captain's Office. Dong! Captain Commander Yamamoto's gaze was focused on Asashiro Kenpachi, who was as indifferent as ever as if Captain Commander Yamamoto's aura had no effect on him. According to Captain Unohana's report, the 5th Division Captain, Watanabe Carey, stabbed the 3rd Division Captain, Sanada Shino, and the 9th Division Captain, Nishino Kenji, in the back, resulting in the failure of Asashiro Sei's arrest. The two captains above are still in a coma. Yamamoto Shigekuni glared at Asashiro Saya. I believe you have an explanation for all this, Asashiro Saya. Asashiro Saya raised one of his eyebrows and casually said, he's just a poor guy who wants to gain more influence for his household but ends up going too far. The so-called privilege, the so-called noble houses, are all meaningless things. Only justice should matter in soul society. As Shinigami, all we have to do is eliminate every single hollow, the evil itself. Enough. Yamamoto Genrisai glared at Asashiro Saya and stopped him from saying another word. Stop spouting that kind of fallacy in captain's meeting. It's just your personal belief that you call justice, that's all. You, who failed to comprehend soul society's justice, don't have the right to talk about justice here. All captains looked at Yamamoto Genrisai in astonishment. After all, Yamamoto Genrisai rarely said this much. It seems that old Yamamoto really values Asashiro highly Karaku Shunsui side. As the person who has known Yamamoto Genrisai longest out of other captains, Karaku Shunsui knew Yamamoto Genrisai very well. In Yamamoto Genrisai's case, if he cared about someone, the stricter he'd be toward that person. Yamamoto wouldn't say that much if he didn't fancy Asashiro. Asashiro Sei's complexion changed. He was about to say something back, but he suddenly pondered about his action and belief because of Yamamoto Genrisai's words. Upon compiling Asashiro Sei's report, Captain Unohana's report, and the injured Shinigami's testimony, Watanabe Carey is hereby branded as a traitor to the Soul Society. Arrest him on sight, or execute him if necessary. This order applies to all Gotei 13, including the captains. Captain Hikifune. Yamamoto looked towards Hikifune Kiryu. According to the 12th Division's report, it's safe to say that Watanabe Carey is fleeing to human world. He was also accompanied by 5th Division Lieutenant Rizaki Senjio and 5th Division 5th Seat Watanabe Ichiro. They'll be sending 2 captains to lead their men in pursuit of these 3 to the human world. Captain Commander. HM. Yamamoto Genrisai looked towards Hikifune Kiryu. The moment we discovered that Watanabe Carey and 2 others tried to flee to human world, Lieutenant Kimura Muyang from our division immediately went on pursuit, so can I specifically request participation in this case? Oh ho. Both Yamamoto Genrisai and Hikifune Kiryu exchanged gaze briefly. Alright, in that case, 8th Division Captain Karaku Shunsui, 12th Division Captain Hikifune Kiryu, I hereby order you 2 to go to human world and pursue the 3 traitors from the 5th Division. You may execute them if you deem it necessary. 6th Division Captain Kuchiki Jinrei and 13th Division Captain Yukitake Shur, I'll have you 2 accompany me to escort the criminal Asashiro Saya to Central 46. The rest of the captains shall remain standby in captain's office until further orders are given. Dismissed. So, Kimura Muyang actually went after them. Yeah, he charged forward the moment he sensed Watanabe Carey's Ryatsu. He sensed Watanabe Carey's Ryatsu and immediately went after him. Both Hikifune Kiryu and Karaku Shunsui glanced at each other and smiled shortly after. Although Kimura Muyang did go off on his own without orders, they both knew that small things like this happen from time to time and just laughed it off. Karaku, have you notified your men? Didn't I tell you? Seeing the puzzled look on Hikifune Kiryu's face, Karaku Shunsui elaborated, Lisa-chan basically always eavesdrop on captain's meeting, so she should be preparing our men by now, so it's fine if I head straight to Kimura. Hikifune Kiryu now seemed confused. His lieutenant Kimura Muyang went off without orders, and Karaku Shunsui's lieutenant actually eavesdropped on captain's meeting. She was at a loss for words. How about yours? Karaku Shunsui asked casually. I have notified my 3rd seat with Kakushitsuijaku, so we should head straight to our objective. I didn't notice at all. Since when did you? You're really something else. Kuraku Shunsui couldn't help but admire her, as even he didn't notice when she had the time to use kid. It's just a little trick that I came up with. That aside, I am even really worried about Kimura. That little, if he really catches up, I don't know what will happen. If that's the case, let's pick up the pace. Kuraku Shunsui and Hikifune Kiryu sped up towards where Kimura Muyang was. Captain, should we keep running away like this? Are you suggesting to return to Godai 13? Watanabe Carey fiercely glared at his lieutenant after hearing his question. It wasn't because of your idea. That bastard Azashiro is just a complete lunatic, eliminating all hollow. He gotta be joking. I thought it was just his excuse to gain more influence. That guy is actually serious about eliminating all hollow. He even tried to convince those old fogies in Central 46. Watanabe Carey was so annoyed because he originally planned to join forces with Azashiro Kenpachi to gain more influence, but he turned out to be such a HM. Why did you stop? Watanabe Carey turned around and asked when he sensed his lieutenant suddenly stopped moving. Even though Watanabe Carey was in this predicament because of his lieutenant, he realized his lieutenant did it was for his own good. Even though he was a little frustrated, he knew that he couldn't keep relying on his lieutenant, as he was no longer a captain, just a traitor to Soul Society, and by now, Godai 13 must have issued an execution order for them. I don't think I can go with you. Rizaki Senjio said indifferently, which obviously surprised the other two. What do you mean by that? Watanabe Carey didn't seem pleased. Exactly as it sounds. Rizaki Senjio's expression was as indifferent as ever, but his words completely changed the look on their face. Rizaki, you bastard, are you betraying Aji-sama? Watanabe Ichiro said with a fiery glare. Rizaki Senjio was quiet for a moment before smirking all of a sudden. Are you a fool? Just how gullible are you? You son of a... Watanabe Ichiro was furious and immediately drew his Zanpakuto, but Watanabe Carey stopped him. Aji-sama. Watanabe Ichiro looked at his uncle confusedly. Had it not for him, he would have struck Rizaki Senjio down. I want to hear your explanation, Senjio. Watanabe Carey ignored the questioning look on his nephew's face and looked straight at Rizaki Senjio solemnly. It seemed that he really wanted an answer. You have always been loyal. Even if I ask you to do something you don't like, you never refuse and always complete the task I gave you. Why would you betray me? Watanabe Carey said with a delicate expression on his face. Rizaki Senjio just smiled. He did not mind answering this question, perhaps out of respect for his former captain, but he did bow his head slightly before explaining. Betray you? No, I've never done such a thing. That's just your wishful thinking. I've never been loyal to you in the first place, so you're quite mistaken. Watanabe Carey frowned. Why would his lieutenant do everything he said so far if it were not out of loyalty? Seeing Watanabe Carey still seemed puzzled, as if knowing what he was thinking, Rizaki Senjio immediately added, I have never been loyal to you. I'm simply loyal to power. There was a trace of madness on Rizaki Senjio's face. Power is the only thing I believe. Absolute power that stands above others. This time, Rizaki Senjio went insane from the looks of it. His maniac laugh sent chills down to Watanabe Carey and Watanabe Ichiro's spine. Anyone would be shaking in their boots right now regardless of how strong Rizaki Senjio was. Watanabe Carey and Watanabe Ichiro saw nothing but a madman in front of them. After a short while, Rizaki Senjio seemed to realize his unbecoming behavior and immediately regained his composure, and his expression gradually reverted to listless as usual. But Watanabe Carey and Watanabe Ichiro would never think that the man in front of them was just an indifferent guy since he snapped off earlier. Up until now, I'm not loyal toward you, but your strength, but what do you think you have left now? You've lost your influence, your status, and soon you will lose strength and your life. I don't think you can escape from Soul Society's nose. Now that you have lost everything, I don't think you're worth following anymore. This is not a betrayal. All I've been loyal to is power. Watanabe Kerry seemed quite disturbed by Rizaki Senjio's remark just now. Aji-sama, let me kill this scum. Watanabe Ichiro was ready to draw his Zanpakuto and cut Rizaki Senjio down. Even though he was a bit startled because of Rizaki Senjio's sudden change, he couldn't allow himself to cower in fear here. He was so eager to kill the guy who betrayed them. Stand down. You are no match for him. Watanabe Kerry stopped his nephew while vigilantly observing Rizaki Senjio. He realized his former lieutenant was not someone he could underestimate. As his captain, who has spent quite some time with him, he knew that he has been holding back out of reservations for him, and his nephew clearly couldn't handle Rizaki Senjio if he went all out. Besides, his Zanpakuto ability was tricky too. Besides, there is no time to waste now. We must hurry up and leave. Watanabe Ichiro realized his uncle had a point. They indeed couldn't afford to waste any time now, so he sheathed his Zanpakuto even though reluctantly while glaring fiercely at Rizaki Senjio. Do you still plan to escape now? You may not make it, Captain Watanabe. Who? Watanabe Kerry's complexion drastically changed, and he quickly put his hand on Zanpakuto. No, I don't think I should call you Captain Watanabe anymore. Maybe it's better to call you a traitor to Soul Society, Watanabe Kerry. Kimura Muyang said with a playful tone as he appeared before them with a smile. Kimura Muyang received a message from Hikifune Kiryu through Kid on his ways. When he heard the news, Kimura Muyang couldn't help but be taken aback. Stabbing two captains in the back, leaving them severely injured and still being treated at the 4th Division's infirmary. In addition, Captain Commander Yamamoto ordered to execute them if they showed even the slightest resistance. Kimura Muyang stared at Watanabe Kerry mockingly. There was not even a handful of cases like this in Soul Society because there was no way one could get away after committing such a crime. Besides, he still got some unfinished business with him. Kimura Muyang. After looking at Kimura Muyang briefly, Watanabe Kerry asked, "You're not gonna hide behind your captain this time?" Kimura Muyang didn't bother responding to Watanabe Kerry's little provocation. They were all dead meat in his eyes anyway, so he just let him do whatever he wanted for now. Kimura Muyang knew himself the best, and he believed that he would never lose to ordinary captains. Besides, Hikifune Kiryu and Karaku Shunsui were on the way. Even if he couldn't deal with these three, it'd be fine as long as he could stall them until Hikifune Kiryu and Karaku Shunsui arrived. Aji-sama, please leave it to me this time. Aji-sama, please leave it to me this time. Watanabe Ichiro, who held a grudge against Kimura Muyang, immediately asked his uncle to let him handle Kimura Muyang by himself. Seeing Watanabe Ichiro's determination, Watanabe Kerry gave it a little thought and nodded immediately after. He only saw Kimura Muyang as a lucky brat, that's all. He was quite skilled indeed, but not that skilled. Besides, he could always step in when things got a bit dicey, so this should be a good chance for his nephew to have a little workout. More importantly, Watanabe Ichiro's Zanpakuto had a slightly special ability, and those who didn't know about it would definitely have a hard time against him. Kimura Muyang was a little surprised when he saw that Watanabe Kerry actually sent Watanabe Ichiro all by himself to fight him. He was laughing deep down as this 5th Division captain clearly didn't take him seriously. It's fine if you gang up on me, actually, yet you send the weakest one out of you three. Are you alright in the head? Kimura Muyang smiled as he observed them one by one. Watanabe Ichiro snapped. The veins on his forehead were bulging. He couldn't endure this humiliation and glared at Kimura Muyang fiercely. Let me make it beforehand, I'm not with those two. Kimura Muyang frowned. As fellow lieutenant, Kimura Muyang obviously recognized who he was, even though he barely knew anything about him mainly because he seemed so hard to approach. What does this guy mean, and on which side was he? Kimura Muyang really couldn't figure out what this oddball was thinking. He hated dealing with this kind of guy the most. Besides, how could Kimura Muyang believe that he was not with the other two just because he said it? Kimura Muyang, I'll pay you back for the humiliation you've put me through. Watanabe Ichiro gnashed his teeth as he glared at Kimura Muyang. Kimura Muyang was puzzled as he didn't remember doing anything to humiliate him. As far as he was concerned, they were complete strangers. You haven't seen my Zanpakuto yet. Watanabe Ichiro gradually regained his composure. Besides, a prodigy like you could care less about other students' business. Kimura Muyang was a little embarrassed because Watanabe Ichiro wasn't that far off from the truth. He rarely socialized with his classmates, let alone the students from another class. The only person he talked to on a daily basis was probably the dense and weird Reincarnation. Okay, I'm not here to hear your gibberish. Kimura Muyang raised his hand to stop Watanabe Ichiro from spouting nonsense. Come to think of it, you are lieutenant now, huh? Watanabe Ichiro smiled and quickly took his stance. From his stance, it was safe to say that he had experiences in actual combat and wasn't just a complete amateur. If that's the case, disperse, Saikirapiru. HM. The mist that was almost invisible to the naked eye was suddenly emanated from the Zanpakuto in Watanabe Ichiro's hand. At the same time, everything around Watanabe Ichiro suddenly became hazy. What is this ability? Seeing the mist around Watanabe Ichiro's body gradually spread out, Kimura Muyang suddenly kept his guard up. Although he was confident in his own strength, he couldn't afford to just ignore this unknown ability in front of him. My Zanpakuto's name is Saikirapiru. The smoke that Saikirapiru discharged has a psychedelic effect, and I can freely manipulate your visual perception while you're in this mist. Watanabe Ichiro looked at Kimura Muyang smugly as if he had already won. For example, what are you seeing now? Watanabe Ichiro suddenly split into two right in front of Kimura Muyang and both of them looked at Kimura Muyang smugly. Do you know which one is me? Well, even if you know which one, how about this? Both of Watanabe Ichiro multiplied and kept multiplying, and before Kimura Muyang knew it, he was already surrounded by 100 people, all of whom had the same face and expression. There were 100 Watanabe Ichiro around Kimura Muyang and all of them talked simultaneously. How about now? Can you find my real body? How do you plan to deal with this situation? No matter how skilled you are, you can't possibly attack all 100 of us at the same time, but I can attack you at will like this. All 100 of them attacked Kimura Muyang at the same time. They all looked exactly like Watanabe Ichiro, but the rest of them knew it was just illusions created by his Zanpakuto. Even so, there was no effective way to deal with it. As Watanabe Ichiro said, even though Kimura Muyang knew it was just an illusion, there was no point unless he destroyed them all at the same time because there was no way to distinguish which one was the real Watanabe Ichiro. Meanwhile, Watanabe Ichiro could blend among these illusions and attacked Kimura Muyang from his blind spot. Even the apathetic Rizaki Senjio were in awe upon seeing the ability of Watanabe Ichiro's Zanpakuto. It was no wonder that Watanabe Ichiro was so arrogant. It was all because this ability was really difficult to deal with. Even most Shinigami would have panicked in this situation. Furthermore, Watanabe Ichiro himself couldn't be underestimated either. Even with 100 people rushing at him, Kimura Muyang was still unfazed and smiled as he drew his Zanpakuto slowly. Kimura Muyang effortlessly blocked all the attack from all directions simply by slightly swinging his Zanpakuto. I'd be so disappointed if this is all you got. Kimura Muyang said after blocking all attacks and flashed out of the encirclement shortly after. You little. Seeing his proud technique didn't even faze Kimura Muyang was really unbearable for him, and the finishing blow was Kimura Muyang's insult. I have at least 3 ways to deal with your ability. Kimura Muyang said mockingly as he raised 3 fingers. He would be as thorough as possible when it came to crushing his enemies. He'd crush them both physically and mentally. First, Kimura Muyang suddenly disappeared and flashed across all of Watanabe Ichiro's clones, destroying them all at once. Kimura Muyang wasn't even out of breath as he stood in front of the real Watanabe Ichiro. Underestimating me is your first mistake. Even if those 100 illusions were real, I can crush them all by myself. Watanabe Ichiro was furious, but it was a fact that the ability he was so proud of was easily dealt with by Kimura Muyang. Even if you crush 100 clones, I can make more clones. If 100 didn't work, I'll make 200. If 200 doesn't work, I'll make 1000. Can you keep this up forever? As Watanabe Ichiro was done talking, there were around 300 Watanabe Ichiro surrounding Kimura Muyang this time. Feel free to try again, and the number will keep rising. Can you do it again? It's not like you have unlimited stamina. Once you show any sign of exhaustion, the real me will finish you off. All Watanabe Ichiro's clones said at the same time and with the exact same expression. Have you found the real me? Kimura Muyang just sighed. Did you think I accidentally left out your real body just now? Did you think I accidentally left out your real body? Watanabe Ichiro's suddenly turned pale. Now that he thought about it, why would Kimura Muyang leave out his real body? And he immediately understood what Kimura Muyang meant by that. Rizaki Senjio and Watanabe Kari, on the side, obviously knew that there was only one answer, which was because Kimura Muyang clearly knew which one was the real Watanabe Ichiro. Impossible. How did you find out? Watanabe Ichiro looked at Kimura Muyang in disbelief as if he saw a ghost. It was a given since the ability he was so proud of was seen through just like that by someone else. Even Aji-sama can't find my real body this easily. You must be bluffing. That one just now must a fluke. Yes, that's gotta be it. Watanabe Ichiro fell into a denial state because he couldn't accept the fact. As someone who has been fawned over by his family ever since he was little because he would be the next heir, Watanabe Ichiro has always been proud of himself. Things got escalated ever since he displayed outstanding talent and enrolled at Shin Academy as he was considered a genius, and everyone admired him. However, everything changed ever since Kimura Muyang came. A prodigy born once in 1,000 years, who graduated from Shin Academy in less than a year, and became a lieutenant right after graduation. Watanabe Ichiro lost his standing as a genius, and everyone's eyes were focused on Kimura Muyang. It was as if his existence didn't even matter anymore ever since Kimura Muyang showed up. There's no way you can see through my ability. It must be just a fluke. Kimura Muyang had nothing to offer but a pitiful look upon seeing the hysterical Watanabe Ichiro. Kimura Muyang considered him to be a talented individual. Unfortunately, his psychological was unstable. Schwa. Kimura Muyang flashed ahead, and he was already right in front of Watanabe Ichiro. A small drop of blood dripped from Watanabe Ichiro's forehead as he pointed his Zanpakuto at Watanabe Ichiro's forehead. The second mistake you made is, again, underestimating me. This illusion of yours may work against an average Shinigami, but it has no effect at all on me. Did it ever occur to you why I was the first to catch up with you? That's because of the difference of drive between most Shinigamis and me. I gotta admit that your ability is pretty good. Those clones also had the same Ryatsu as you, and an average Shinigami shouldn't be able to distinguish between the real you and the clones, but your body is as easy to distinguish as fireflies in the night for my eyes. Kimura Muyang sheathed his Zanpakuto after brandishing it a little and noticed the look of despair on Watanabe Ichiro's face, but he didn't care. He would show no mercy when it came to dealing with his enemies. The third mistake you made is, once again, underestimating me. Did you seriously think you can beat me even though that's all you got? How ridiculous. I've already shown you 2 ways to deal with your ability just now, and let me show you the last one. It's the simplest, most straightforward, yet the most effective way. Kimura Muyang rolled up his sleeves, revealing a pair of black bracer on each of his wrists. Kimura Muyang tore off the bracer, and as one of the bracers was torn off, the other one was also torn off on its own. As both bracers were torn off, a golden chain made of kid appeared in both Kimura Muyang's wrists and ankles. Rizaki Senjio observed the chains on Kimura Muyang's wrists and ankles, and he seemed to have a faint idea about what it was. Watanabe Ichiro was clearly shocked by the scene in front of him. He could sense Ryatsu leaking out of the golden chains, and based on the Ryatsu, he guessed it was a form of Beicut. However, he suddenly turned pale after arriving at that conclusion. It seems that you have a rough idea about what this is. Kimura Muyang glanced at Watanabe Ichiro and then shifted his gaze towards Watanabe Keri without concealing his killing intent. Watanabe Keri glared back at Kimura Muyang. He had his own pride as a captain, so he wouldn't show any sign of backing off here. However, he did admit he was underestimating Kimura Muyang. The strength he displayed was clearly beyond that of a lieutenant. However, he believed that no matter what kind of petty little tricks Kimura Muyang would use, he would crush him thoroughly. Watanabe Keri could no longer contain his murderous intent. He was determined to finish off Kimura Muyang along with Rizaki Senjio, who betrayed him. Watanabe Keri placed his hand on the hilt, ready to attack at any time. Hakuraisa, dispel. Along with Kimura Muyang's exclamation, the bright golden chains on his wrists and ankles immediately shattered into pieces, and massive Ryatsu suddenly burst out of Kimura Muyang, towering into the sky with him as the center. Watanabe Ichiro was so shocked by the outburst of Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu that he passed out. This Isho, could a mere lieutenant have this much Ryatsu? Watanabe Keri gasped while holding his nephew, who passed out because of Kimura Muyang's intimidating Ryatsu in his arms. Is this Ryatsu really belong to a lieutenant? Even Captain's Ryatsu wasn't any stronger than this. Rizaki Senjio tried his best to keep himself from falling to his knees and shook his head after looking at Watanabe Keri for a moment. No, even Captain's Ryatsu isn't this overwhelming. This monstrous Ryatsu, is this guy really a lieutenant like me? Such a question popped up even in the apathetic Rizaki Senjio's mind. This is the simplest and most straightforward, yet also the most effective way to nullify the mist that your Zanpakuto emanated. With this overwhelming Ryatsu, your ability is basically useless. Kimura Muyang tried his best to hold down his Ryatsu that seeped out uncontrollably and looked at Watanabe Ichiro. You passed out already? What a waste of time, then. It's your turn next, Watanabe Keri. Kimura Muyang said as he slowly drew his Zanpakuto and pointed his finger towards Watanabe Keri, challenging him head-on before turning around towards Rizaki Senjio. You there. If you are not with them, then stay away. There's no guarantee that you'll get away unscathed if you stay here. At his current state, it was no exaggeration for Kimura Muyang to warn Rizaki Senjio as he might just crush everything around him. Rizaki Senjio subconsciously evacuated to a safer location. He knew that he would be reduced to nothing if he stayed there. Are you ready, Watanabe Keri? There's no more Mr. Nice Guy from here on. Kimura Muyang dragged his Zanpakuto as he walked toward Watanabe Keri while staring at him with cold eyes. I remember what happened that day as if it was yesterday. I will see for myself if your strength really is beyond my wildest imagination, as you said that day. It's a bit hard to hold back my Ryatsu now, so be sure not to die so quickly. I want to play a little longer. Watanabe Keri no longer acted all high and mighty all of a sudden. After witnessing Kimura Muyang's power firsthand, he realized that he had underestimated Kimura Muyang all along. He could no longer say that he could easily defeat him now in this situation. He immediately backed off for a moment by using Shuanpa and carefully put down Watanabe Ichiro, who passed out in his arms. His kind eyes as he put his nephew down didn't match his appearance at all. Kimura Muyang didn't have to worry about Watanabe Keri running away. Even though he was a traitor to Soul Society, his pride as a captain wouldn't allow him to do such an embarrassing thing. Moreover, he was a noble, and for a noble who simply wanted to restore his family's glory like him, pride was way more valuable than his life. I didn't expect you have such a soft side, too. I guess you really can't judge a book by its cover. Kimura couldn't help but say these after seeing the stern and rude Watanabe Carey showed such kindness. He's my only relative, you see. Watanabe Carey looked at Kimura Muyang solemnly, not with his usual condescending look. So you can talk to me normally, too? I thought you couldn't speak without your condescending tone. After a brief pause, Watanabe Carey finally answered, "You're qualified to talk with me on equal ground with that strength of yours." Kimura Muyang realized that he thought too much into it. Watanabe Carey sounded just as condescending as always. Even though Kimura Muyang despised Watanabe Carey to the point that he wanted to kill him, he was extremely calm this time for some reason. Was it because he got everything under control? Such a question crossed his mind, but he immediately realized that he didn't actually know how strong Watanabe Carey was, so he immediately cast such thought away from his mind. "Come on, let's see what you got," Watanabe Carey said as he drew his Zanpakuto. Smash, Raven Fly. Watanabe Carey used his Shurikai right off the bat. Following this incantation, the Zanpakuto in his hand shape-shifted into an entirely different weapon that resembled an Isekai but more ominous. This is. While Kimura Muyang was still brooding about this oddly shaped Zanpakuto, Watanabe Carey already rushed toward him. Even though it appeared to be just a straightforward attack, his momentum was nothing to laugh at. However, Kimura Muyang effortlessly blocked Watanabe Carey's thrust by slightly raising his Zanpakuto. Something strange afterward, Kimura Muyang felt a peculiar force once his Zanpakuto collided with Watanabe Carey's Zanpakuto that suddenly deflected his Zanpakuto downwards while Watanabe Carey's Zanpakuto was driven straight into his face. Kimura Muyang's complexion changed. It was a close call, but he managed to evade it by tilting his head at the last moment. Even though Kimura Muyang was positive that he evaded the attack, he felt there was an external force that grazed his cheek. He couldn't believe he was wounded in the face right off the bat. Aside from during his training with Kimura Kanzuya, he has never received any scar on his face, even during his journey with Zaraki Kenpachi. He realized that even as rotten as he was, Watanabe Carey was still a captain, and he couldn't afford to take him lightly. Even though he was a little bit surprised, Kimura Muyang wasn't the kind of person who would let his enemy do whatever they pleased, so as he dodged the attack, he touched Watanabe Carey with his index finger. This is bad. Realizing Kimura Muyang tapped him, Watanabe Carey's complexion changed. Although he was not that well versed in kid, he could tell which kid Kimura Muyang was going to use just from his finger's gesture. Had number 4. Byakurai. Following Kimura Muyang's remark, a concentrated bolt of lightning was generated from Kimura Muyang's fingertips and penetrated Watanabe Carey's abdomen. Schwa. After exchanging attacks, both of them used Shuanpa to create some distance between them. Kimura Muyang touched his cheek and immediately clicked his tongue right after. Tsk, it really was grazed. As he looked at Watanabe Carey closer, he clicked his tongue once again. Tsk, I thought I managed to pierce his heart. Kimura Muyang's kid blew a small hole on Watanabe Carey's abdomen, and his white Captain Haori was stained by red blood. I didn't expect that you'd be pretty good at kid. Watanabe Carey just looked straight at Kimura Muyang as if the wound he sustained just now didn't affect him at all. You took the words right out of my mouth. I didn't expect a burly fellow like you would have such Zanpakuto. Oh. Then what kind of Zanpakuto did you expect I'd have? Watanabe Carey replied with another question. When Watanabe Carey asked him that question, he couldn't really come up with an answer. He was a little thrown off by Watanabe Carey's sudden change in attitude that he began to question whether the one in front of him was the same Watanabe Carey who humiliated him that day. Watanabe Carey didn't even go for the kill even when Kimura Muyang let down his guard like that. However, Kimura Muyang could feel the atmosphere was gradually changing, so he immediately collected himself. He didn't know what happened to Watanabe Carey, but he realized this wasn't the time to delve further into this matter as he must defeat him right here and now. Kimura Muyang suddenly raised his Zanpakuto. Shingetsu. An azure crescent-like compressed air blade came out of Kimura Muyang's Zanpakuto, heading straight toward Watanabe Keri at incredible speed. Watanabe Keri was startled and immediately raised his Zanpakuto in his hand to block the incoming attack. As the crescent compressed air blade hit his Zanpakuto, it was deflected downwards for some reason, but it still hit Watanabe Keri. Kimura Muyang watched closely and didn't overlook what happened. As the compressed air blade dispersed, Watanabe Keri emerged from the smoke caused by the impact. He himself wasn't wounded at all, but he seemed irritated for some reason. I have a rough idea what your Zanpakuto's ability is now. Kimura Muyang said as he looked at Watanabe Keri. Humph. Watanabe Keri grunted. Obviously, he knew what Kimura Muyang did just now. Even though the compressed air blade was so fast, it completely lacked power, but he instinctively used his Zanpakuto's ability to block it because he panicked. Because of that, the kid in front of him managed to figure out his ability. Now that I know your trick, things won't go like last time. You'll never injure my face like earlier anymore. In a blink of an eye, Kimura Muyang was already right beside Watanabe Keri and almost beheaded him. Dang! Right before Kimura Muyang's Zanpakuto could cut off Watanabe Keri's neck, his Zanpakuto was deflected by a strange force, and then Watanabe Keri blocked it effortlessly. I knew it. Kimura Muyang used Shuunpa to back off and said, judging from that sensation just now, it must be a wind type, no? As expected of a prodigy. Watanabe Keri looked at Kimura Muyang seriously and said, to think that you can figure out my Zanpakuto's ability so quickly. Kimura Muyang just pointed his Zanpakuto at Watanabe Keri without saying anything back. Dang 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 dang. The sounds of swords clashing against each other reverberated in the forest, sometimes followed by a consecutive loud sound. Their surrounding was razed to the ground. The dense forest was in a mess because of the battle between two men. A bunch of holes on the ground was also found around them. Rizaki Senjio was baffled as he watched the fight. He has always been confident in his own skill and his Zanpakuto's ability, but upon seeing the battle unfolding in front of him, he realized that a captain's strength was beyond his understanding. Meanwhile, after exchanging blows, Kimura Muyang twisted his foot and swung his sword at Watanabe Keri, utilizing the momentum of the spin while pointing the palm of his other hand at Watanabe Keri's chest. Watanabe Keri managed to block Kimura Muyang's attack, but he noticed the blue light concentrating on Kimura Muyang's hand a little too late. Had number 33. Skasui. A blue flame was discharged from Kimura Muyang's hand, and the loud sound startled Rizaki Senjio, who was watching from the sidelines. What's up with that destructive power? It's just a number 33 kid. Rizaki Senjio has never been this overwhelmed by emotion after years. Be it Kimura Muyang's Ryatsu, Zanjutsu, kid, and even raw power were so overwhelming that even his heart was stirred upside down. Kimura Muyang was just a lieutenant, no different than him. Kimura Muyang even just graduated last year, and even though he didn't say it out loud, he was certain that Kimura Muyang was just lucky. He also believed that the rumor about Kimura Muyang was exaggerated by a bunch of ignorant people and just laughed it off. But now that he saw what this lucky brat was capable of firsthand, Rizaki Senjio was so embarrassed. Even the apathetic Rizaki Senjio was overwhelmed by emotion as he watched the fierce battle. Watanabe Keri was covered in smoke after being blasted away by Kid. However, instead of chasing Watanabe Keri and followed up with another attack, Kimura Muyang waited and ascertained Watanabe Keri's condition. Meanwhile, Watanabe Keri furrowed his brows upon seeing the injury that he sustained from taking on Kimura Muyang's Kid on the chest. Rather than an injury, it was more of a bruise. After all, he was confident when it came to toughness. What really bothered Watanabe Keri was Kimura Muyang. Watanabe Keri's biggest advantage was his extraordinary physique. His tough physique gave him more strength and speed than an average Shinigami, but both Kimura Muyang's speed and power rivaled his. During the attack just now, it was as if Watanabe Carry's advantage in physique was completely meaningless. Not only that, Kimura Muyang kept blasting him with Kid and some other attacks from his blind spot. Indeed, the low-level Kid that Kimura Muyang used earlier barely caused any damage, but it was quite pesky and threw off Watanabe Carry's rhythm. What Watanabe Carry was unaware of was the fact that Kimura Muyang constantly strengthened his physique as per Shien's instruction, so when it came to the physique, Kimura Muyang was way above an average Shinigami. In fact, it was Kimura Muyang who was surprised that Watanabe Carry turned out to be that tough. Even though he used the low-level Kids earlier, knowing that it wouldn't inflict that much damage on Watanabe Carry, he was still surprised that it only threw off Watanabe Carry's rhythm. After a while, Kimura Muyang still didn't see any movement from the smoke, so he thought that Watanabe Carry must be planning to hide in the smoke. Kimura Muyang was getting tired of it and said, "Are you planning to hide? Just don't forget that you are still a fugitive. Are you sure it's wise to drag this on?" Seeing that Watanabe Carry still showed no sign of coming out, Kimura Muyang was getting impatient. He raised Zanpakuto up high and struck down. An azure crescent-like compressed air blue came out from Kimura Muyang's Zanpakuto, blowing away the smoke, revealing Watanabe Carry, who was standing there, completely unfazed. "I thought you would use this chance to attack?" Kimura Muyang asked because he found it odd. "Are you holding back or what? It's too late." Watanabe Carry shook his head with a helpless look on his face. Kimura Muyang froze for a moment as he didn't understand what Watanabe Carry meant, but his expression changed as he looked around. Before he realized it, there were two figures beside Razaki Senjio. "Captain Karaku, Sister Kiryu." Kimura Muyang said in surprise as he saw them, "Since when did you guys?" "Just now." Hikifune Kiryu replied as he looked at Kimura Muyang with a satisfied look. "This is quite a mess, ha ha ha. To think that you've come this far, Kimura. I'm honestly surprised." Karaku Shunsui said with a smile after observing their surrounding. This." Before Kimura Muyang could say a word, Hikifune Kiryu interrupted him. "We'll discuss that later, Captain Karaku. Captain Watanabe's affair comes first." After a slight glance at Karaku Shunsui, Hikifune Kiryu turned to Watanabe Carry. "I'll let you choose, Captain Watanabe. Either give yourself up, or Captain Karaku will force you." Despite giving Watanabe Carry two options, Hikifune Kiryu already took his stance, ready to subdue Watanabe Carry if he tried anything funny. Watanabe Carry seemed hesitant, but in the end, he sheathed Zanpakuto. Apparently, he had no intention to resist. Seeing Watanabe Carry's response, Karaku Shunsui and Hikifune Kiryu sighed in relief, but they didn't let their guard down. Karaku Shunsui walked toward Watanabe Carry without taking his eyes off Watanabe Carry's Zanpakuto and patted him on the shoulder. He seemed to be whispering something to Watanabe Carry, and Kimura Muyang noticed that Watanabe Carry seemed to calm down a bit. Karaku Shunsui then turned toward Kimura Muyang and said, "Okay, it's fine now, so put away your Zanpakuto, Kimura. Watanabe will not resist anymore." "What?" It didn't quite sink in for Kimura Muyang yet. "Don't tell me it's over already." "Yes, or are you expecting something else, Lil Yang?" Hikifune Kiryu was already right beside Kimura Muyang after a quick shunpa. "You still think it's not troublesome enough and want to make things worse. Even as Ashiro Sia's affair is not taken care of yet. That's not it's just. Kimura Muyang looked towards Watanabe Carry and asked wonderingly, "Why didn't you use Bankai? You might be able to escape if you use Bankai." "Bankai?" Watanabe Carry looked back at Kimura Muyang weirdly and seemed as if he wanted to say something, but he hesitated and ended up not saying anything else. Hearing Kimura Muyang's question, Karaku Shunsui and Hikifune Kiryu's expression changed, and they slowly reached out to their hands Zanpakuto's hilt. Seeing Watanabe carry Sai, they were a little bit relieved but remained vigilant. Kimura, you'll be responsible for escorting Watanabe Ichiro. We're going back now. Kiraku Shunsui immediately ordered Kimura Muyang to carry Watanabe Ichiro back before he said anything weird again. Kiraku Shunsui and Hikifune Kiryu glanced at each other, and both of them seemed relieved. Fortunately, everything was resolved without a hitch. If Watanabe Carry decided to use Bankai out of desperation, they'd have another problem at hand. When Kimura Muyang carried Watanabe Ichiro, Rizaki Senjio also followed him. Watanabe Carry was escorted by Kiraku Shunsui and Hikifune Kiryu as they made their way back to Siriidii. Old man Yama, we've brought them back. Kiraku Shunsui took off the bamboo hat on his head and tried his best to stay composed upon reporting in as he and the rest entered the 1st Division Assembly Hall. Captain Commander Yamamoto slightly opened his eyes, glancing at Watanabe Carry for a moment before shifting his gaze toward Kimura Muyang. No one could figure out what was the meaning behind this at the moment. Sensing Captain Commander Yamamoto's intent gaze at him without blinking, Kimura Muyang sent shivers down his spine. He was pretty sure that he didn't make any mistake unless drinking with Shinji at the tavern too often was considered a mistake. Kimura Muyang just couldn't shake off this discomfort with Captain Commander Yamamoto staring at him so intently. He wasn't the traitor, yet why was he the one being stared at? Sensing this weird atmosphere in the assembly hall, Kiraku Shunsui laughed a little to break the tension and immediately asked, "Hold Yamamoto, what should we do with Captain Watanabe and his men?" Only then did Captain Commander Yamamoto finally take his eyes off Kimura Muyang and turned at Kiraku Shunsui. Kimura Muyang sighed in relief as Captain Commander Yamamoto was really intimidating. He could have peed his pants just by looking at him in the eyes. 5th Division Captain Watanabe Carry, Lieutenant Rizaki Senjio, 5th Seat Watanabe Ichiro, you three are suspected of betraying the Soul Society. Therefore, your Zanpakuto will be temporarily confiscated, and you'll be detained in the 3rd Division's prison as you waited for the trial. Captain Commander Yamamoto slammed down the cane in his hand and said solemnly. All of 5th Division's affairs will be handled by 8th Division Captain Kiraku Shunsui for the time being. Several 1st Division members then confiscated Watanabe Carry and the other two Zanpakuto. These three didn't show any sign of struggling, even though they seemed a little hesitant to hand over their Zanpakuto. Even Rizaki Senjio, who has been very cooperative, also handed over his Zanpakuto without saying a word. Seeing these three handed over their Zanpakuto obediently, Kiraku Shunsui was a bit relieved. Captain Commander Yamamoto then nodded as a signal for his division members to escort Watanabe Carry and his men to their cell. Since they handed over their Zanpakuto, they clearly had no intention to put up a fight. Besides, they were in the middle of the 1st Division headquarters. They wouldn't get out unscathed even if they put up a fight. Okay, dismiss. Except for Kimura Muyang. Kimura Muyang was shocked when Captain Commander Yamamoto ordered him to stay back all by himself. What would Captain Commander Yamamoto need from a lieutenant like him? Not to mention ordering everyone else to leave, so they could talk privately. Even if he did have something to say to him, shouldn't it be his lieutenant, Sasakaibe, that informed him? Hearing Captain Commander's order, Hikifune Kiryu was stunned. But after thinking for a moment, she seemed to have a rough idea about it and immediately walked toward Kimura Muyang and gave him a pat on the shoulder before leaving with Kiraku Shunsui. Kiryu-san, no. Are you going to abandon me too? Kimura Muyang panicked as he watched Hikifune Kiryu leaving without a word after patting his shoulder. It was as if she left him alone to his fate. Kimura Muyang tried to guess what Hikifune Kiryu meant by the pat on the shoulder. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He had a bad feeling about this, but he couldn't figure out what would happen to him. Dong! Captain Commander Yamamoto slammed down his cane and snapped Kimura Muyang from his reverie. Kimura Muyang was surprised and found that Captain Commander Yamamoto was staring at him solemnly. Captain Commander, did you have a particular task for me? Kimura Muyang tried his best to sound calm as he looked at Captain Commander Yamamoto's eyes. Lieutenant Kimura, you defeated Captain Watanabe and brought him back. Captain Commander Yamamoto said all of a sudden. Kimura Muyang frowned. He started to think that this was all about him chasing after Watanabe Carry without receiving orders. No, I didn't defeat Captain Watanabe. I merely stalled him, that's all. He stopped putting up a fight because of Captain Kiraku and Captain Hikifune. Is that so? Captain Commander Yamamoto said, still staring at Kimura Muyang. His eyes were like a vast ocean, and Kimura Muyang couldn't even guess what he was thinking right now. You didn't use Shirkai earlier, right? Right when Kimura Muyang was a little relieved because it wasn't about him acting outside of orders, Captain Commander Yamamoto suddenly discussed this matter. Dismiss. Kimura Muyang was surprised when Captain Commander Yamamoto suddenly brought that up, but before he could explain, Captain Commander Yamamoto sent him away, so he immediately shut his mouth. However, as he turned around and walked toward the door. You're pretty tough. Meet me here every afternoon starting tomorrow. Right before Kimura Muyang was about to leave Assembly Hall, Captain Commander Yamamoto's indifferent voice clearly reached his ears. Yes. Kimura Muyang immediately stopped before turning around and bowed to Captain Commander Yamamoto once again and then left Captain's office with a smile on his face. Sure, what do you think? Captain Commander Yamamoto suddenly asked even though the assembly hall was empty. There is no problem in terms of skill. Based on my daily observation, I'd say there's no other problem other than his tendency to slack off. I see, Captain Commander Yamamoto's eyebrows flicked, and he seemed to be deep in thought. If that's the case, let's beat him to shape. Godi 13 is in such a dire right now. Including this incident, there are 4 vacant captain seats in our ranks right now. No matter the place and era it was, a void will definitely bring inconsistency to the world, and a void will be the easiest prey for evil to latch their claw on. The vacant captain seat must be filled as soon as possible. Captain Commander Yamamoto slowly opened his eyes, and a bright glow flashed in his eyes. It seems that old man Yama is trying to push Kimura up, but isn't this too sudden? After exiting the captain's office, Kiraku Shunsui looked up at the sky profoundly before turning around and looked towards Hikifune Kiryu. Then again, my condolences, Captain Hikifune. Losing one of your capable men can be hard, after all. With a smile on his face, Hikifune Kiryu said, of course not. I'm proud to have such a competent subordinate. What's more fulfilling than seeing your subordinate grow like this? After staring at Hikifune Kiryu profoundly, Kiraku Shunsui turned around and tilted down his bamboo hat, and his tone suddenly changed from playful to serious. Godi 13 is quite vulnerable now. It's just one thing after another, and the sudden changes among the captains are really worrying. Yeah. Hikifune Kiryu slightly nodded solemnly in agreement, but then she followed up with a smile, don't worry, I believe Captain Commander will take care of everything, and it's gonna be fine. Kiraku Shunsui froze for a moment and then smiled as well, it seems that I really brood too much over this. Everything will change eventually, and that just happens to be now, that's all. Old man Yama will definitely do something about it. As for Kimura, there he comes. Hikifune Kiryu turned around and saw Kimura Muyang, who seemed to be in good spirits as he came out of the assembly hall. Kiryu-san. Captain Kiraku. Kimura Muyang called out the 2 captains. Yo, Kimura, you seem to be in good spirits. How did it go? Kimura Muyang said with a smile, it's nothing. Captain Commander just told me to see him every afternoon starting tomorrow. Although he tried so hard to keep his calm, he couldn't hide the excitement in his tone. Kimura Muyang had no doubt that it would be Captain Commander's personal mentoring. No wonder he was so excited. Hearing Kimura Muyang's answer, Kiraku Shunsui couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. To think that old man Yama would personally mentor him, it seemed that he really valued Kimura Muyang. Kiraku Shunsui looked at Kimura Muyang meaningfully and patted his shoulder. Old Yamamoto's personal mentoring, you should know what that means. Well, yes, of course. Based on what Captain Commander Yamamoto said, Kimura Muyang believed that he'd teach him Hakuda. The out-of-the-world Ikatsu and Skatsu that Captain Commander Yamamoto demonstrated in the anime left a deep impression on Kimura Muyang's heart. If he could master that super punch that blasted away Wonder Ice, he would definitely. What are you waiting for? Let's go back. Ah, wait for me, Kiryu-san. Kimura Muyang immediately caught up with Hikifune Kiryu. He was grinning all the way until they arrived at the 12th Division's barrack. Kiraku Shunsui just watched Kimura Muyang's back as he disappeared from his sight. Pant 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 pant. Kimura Muyang fell to the ground weakly. Although his body was covered with sweat that it was so sticky and uncomfortable, he didn't even want to move one finger. Is that all it takes to put you out of breath, kid? Captain Commander Yamamoto's voice came from the side. Although he sounded as indifferent as usual, those who were familiar with Captain Commander would know that there was a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Ah, I'm afraid so, old man Yama. Your fist is too powerful. Kimura Muyang was still lying down there, gasping for air, and continued. My whole body is in pain that I can't even move a finger. Just like his Zenjutsu, Captain Commander Yamamoto's Hakuda was rigid, solid, and absolute power. His power was on a whole different level. He lifted the heavy as if it was as light as a feather. From the way he punched, Kimura Muyang could guess how powerful it was. Although it seemed plain, the destructive power each punch packed was unbelievable. Kimura Muyang himself was the proof of that. Yamamoto Genrisai just looked at Kimura Muyang, who couldn't move with a satisfied look on his face. Although Kimura Muyang often complained, Kimura Muyang still did everything he told. He was also talented and tough. Maybe he could inherit my Hakuda. That thought suddenly crossed Yamamoto Genrisai's mind and couldn't leave his mind. Therefore, he, who at first simply intended to check out what Kimura Muyang got, became strict and serious at teaching him now that Yamamoto Genrisai has treated Kimura Muyang as his own disciple. By this time, Kimura Muyang and Yamamoto Genrisai had bonded to the point where the way they addressed each other has changed from Captain Commander and Lieutenant Kimura to Old Man Yama and Kid. Okay, let's wrap this up for today. Upon seeing Kimura Muyang was too tired to move a muscle, Yamamoto Genrisai thought that he was too strict. He himself was anxious as he never trained anyone this strict before in his life. He never expected that Kimura Muyang could come this far because he just wanted him to experience the training firsthand at first. But to his surprise, Kimura Muyang could keep up with the training. So, we're done for today. Kimura Muyang immediately got up and smiled the moment Yamamoto Genrisai said they were done with the training. This kid. Yamamoto Genrisai was surprised. He thought that Kimura Muyang was too tired to move a muscle, but it turned out he had the gal to trick him. Ouch ouch. It hurts. Seeing Yamamoto Genrisai was staring at him intently, Kimura Muyang immediately pretended to fall to the ground while holding his shoulder and shouted as if he was in pain. Relax, I won't take back my words. Today's training ends here. Even Yamamoto Genrisai couldn't help but chuckle after seeing Kimura Muyang turned out to be faking his exhaustion. Although that was a hopeless part of Kimura Muyang, he didn't take back his words. However, before Kimura Muyang could even breathe a sigh of relief, Yamamoto Genrisai immediately added. Tomorrow's training will be doubled. Kimura Muyang almost fainted when he heard those words. His daily training was already brutal as it was. Imagine double of that. Since today's training is over, care to join me for a cup of tea? Kimura Muyang immediately nodded in response to Yamamoto Genrisai's invitation. By this period of time, Kimura Muyang has learned about Yamamoto Genrisai's hobbies and interests. The tea ceremony was a leisure activity that he enjoyed. As Kimura Muyang took a sip, he felt rejuvenated. This relaxing activity really soothes his mind and body after intense training. Oh ho! So, you at least know how to enjoy a tea. This time Yamamoto Genrisai seemed like an ordinary old man, completely different from his usual stern and strict self. Don't follow Shunsui's example. He only knows how to drink sake all day. Kimura Muyang suddenly blushed embarrassedly. He has always been drinking with Shinji as soon as he was free. In fact, he just drank with them until midnight last night, and he was pretty sure that he drank more than Shunsui. Shunsui and Lisa ended up stopping him as he drank too much, even though Lisa herself drank even more than him. Yamamoto Genrisai pretended not to notice Kimura Muyang's awkward expression and picked up the teacup and took a sip, savoring the tea. Learning how profound a tea ceremony is should be good for you. It can calm your nerves, help you concentrate so that you can understand yourself, understand what power is, why your power exists, and how you should use it. Try to calm your mind and concentrate on essential things that are most important for you. Kimura Muyang conscientiously took in the meaning of Yamamoto Genrisai's words. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how profound those words were. What is power? How to face yourself? Will you be the master of your power or merely a slave to it? These philosophical questions suddenly flooded Kimura Muyang's mind. As Kimura Muyang held the teacup in his hand, his eyes were drawn to a few tea leaves that slowly converged in the middle. Kimura Muyang felt that his impetuous heart was soothed the more he focused on the tea leaves. Then it was as if there was something that arose deep down inside him that intensified as time passed. By the time Kimura Muyang came back to his senses, the tea in his hand had already cooled down, and the sky was already dark before he realized it. It turned out so much time had passed since he was lost in thought. Kimura Muyang looked towards Yamamoto Genrisai, who was still sitting across him apologetically. From the looks of it, Yamamoto Genrisai seemed to keep him company the whole time. A captain commander was usually so busy that the chance of having an audience with him alone didn't come that often, yet he kept Kimura Muyang company until nightfall. Seeing Kimura Muyang's expression, Yamamoto Genrisai immediately knew what Kimura Muyang was going to say and just shoved a freshly brewed cup of tea toward Kimura Muyang instead of saying a word. After taking a sip of the tea that Yamamoto Genrisai just brewed for him, Kimura Muyang slowly sorted out his thoughts. Too many things entered his mind at once, and he couldn't process it all yet. It felt like he almost grasped something, yet nothing came to mind. It seems that you have thought about a lot of things. There's no point in rushing it. Just take your time thinking. Kimura Muyang was silent for a moment as Yamamoto Genrisai was right. He could take his time pondering about it. Brooding over it right now would result in nothing but trouble. You're right. I'll ask you some other time. Kimura Muyang quickly put these thoughts aside. That was how he has been. If there were something he didn't understand, he would simply put it aside. It's getting late. I'll take my leave, old man Yama. Kimura Muyang finished his tea and bid his farewell to Yamamoto Genrisai. Wait a moment, Yamamoto Genrisai said out of the blue, ignoring the curious look on Kimura Muyang's face, and then he put down the teacup in his hand. I have taught you for a quite while. Although it's a bit weird that Yamamoto Genrisai said that out of the blue, Kimura Muyang sat back out of respect and then said after a brief pause, yes, it's already around a year and 3 months. Why did you ask all of a sudden, old Yamamoto? During that period, you should have learned almost everything. I have nothing left to teach you for the time being, so you don't need to come again starting tomorrow. Huh? Kimura Muyang immediately raised his head and looked towards Yamamoto Genrisai surprisedly, really, old man Yama? Didn't you say that tomorrow's training is doubled? Seeing Kimura Muyang had a hard time believing that he was telling the truth, Yamamoto Genrisai was slightly touched, but he didn't show it on his face. Your Zenjutsu is excellent, your kid has improved ever since you're in Captain Hikafune's care. As for Shuunpa and Hakuda, I have taught you personally, and it should be enough. You now have reached your limit in Shinigami's 4 fighting techniques, Zankinsoki. Kimura Muyang listened carefully to Yamamoto Genrosai. Usually, there would be a but right after because he knew Yamamoto Genrosai wouldn't simply praise him. He must have something else to say.